Ladies and gentlemen, let me open a strategic planning conference workshop for February the 17th, 2018. The purpose of the meeting, of course, is council input and discussion regarding budget considerations for the fiscal year 2018 and 19 budget beyond. And at this point, I'll just hand this off down to Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Wish you luck.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor Reed, and council members. I want to again thank you for spending an extra Saturday morning with us here, and all the staff and residents that are here. This has become sort of a tradition that's worked well for us, I think, where we take a step back and talk about some of the longer-term issues and questions that have been vexing us a little bit, and try to get some maybe additional questions from the council, some additional awareness information to you. And if there's any research, we can go from there. But the objective is to lay a foundation so that when we talk about budget and other issues in the coming months, that we've had this opportunity to talk a little bit more strategically and without the press of an immediate decision in front of us. So I want to thank all the staff members who obviously are here, but also the people that wrote the papers and the material. It's extensive, and I think they did a great job once again. Special thanks to John McCarter. He compiled and edited and wrote herd on everybody to make sure we got our deadlines met and got this all to you in a timely manner. You've had a couple weeks with the materials, so hope you've had opportunity to digest all that. As we've done in the past, I'd suggest that maybe I'll introduce each item briefly, circulate some questions that I was going to use to sort of get conversations started. I gave you hard copies of that at your places here today too, and just see where it goes from there. I'll try to keep things moving a little bit, make sure we hear from people, and if there's any consensus or questions that we develop or I see, I'll try to facilitate that. So the key objectives, we started with those, and we drafted back in December some questions or topics of those and circulate those to the council. Had council provide some feedback on that and maybe an addition or two. So the papers that are here are in the notebooks. We also provided updates on last year's, trying to have some continuity with that. So there's brief updates on those, a couple pages on each of those that we did last year. And then there's a new thing we started last year, and that's sort of a staffing outlook. And that's from the staff and just from the departments as they see now, without the benefit and the constriction of reality of budgets and different priorities, sort of how they see their staffing needs in the future. So that's in there as well, and hopefully we'll get time to touch on that at the end. So just kicking off then, first topic was our fiscally responsible bucket strategic priority. We had a paper in there which was our financial policies. Cynthia and Rick put that together. It's in our budget document each year, our financial policies, but we probably don't give it enough time at the budget itself to talk about that. And if there's any questions, we do refer to that and reference that during the year. But if there's any questions or thoughts on that, if you'd like us to look at those, this would be a great opportunity to talk about that. And Cynthia did suggest some questions in some areas that we wanted to look at for updates. So increasing the general fund policy minimums and changing the debt structure, et cetera. Those have been done. So just kick that off. Has council got any questions or ideas or consensus of our financial policies, what you'd like us to look at?
Yeah, I've got just a question on page 11, item F, employee benefit fund unrestricted. Just wondering why there's no balance minimum.
Cynthia, you want to take that?
Yes, sir. The employee benefits fund is an internal service fund, and these funds are actually just to cover their actual costs. We did look into the Government Finance Officers Association best practices to see if we could see a required reserve minimum, and we could not identify one. However, we did find cities with minimums that ranged from 10% to 25% of costs, and so there's not an issue at all with putting in a minimum reserve for that fund.
Okay. It's just, I guess when I look at what the costs are doing, having some padding there might not be a bad idea. But my other question was page 15, item D on debt structure. And when we look at that, we're doing GOs at 25 years, but we still have some of our revenue bonds at 30 years. And I just believe in shorter term lending when we have low interest rates, but
Yes,
or
sir.
any interest rates.
Let me first say that a lot of the things in the financial policies are going to be just pure housekeeping because they haven't been updated since 2011.
Right.
But back in 2015, council directed staff to limit the GOs to 20 years.
Okay.
So this is just putting it into the actual written policy.
Okay,
And they did agree to a longer term for the water and sewer type improvements because they last longer.
longer.
Okay.
I understand.
Yes,
All
sir.
Those were the only two things I saw.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look wonderful.
Mr. Carbone had some.
Thank you. Can you hit on the general fund unrestricted fund balance? What's currently in the policy and what's
Okay,
proposed?
All right, let me find that in the policy.
So are we now doing 2 months of reoccurring OpEx?
We are doing 2 months. We are thinking of bringing forward a recommendation to increase that amount, mainly because of our close proximity to the Gulf and things like Hurricane Harvey.
I guess let me back. This is more giving us a heads up. We're going to have some workshops or discussions to kind of roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty gritty, right?
Yes, sir. There are numerous changes to the policy, and we do have some marked up copies available already, but we have not completed the recommendations for changes. So we will bring those to you in a detailed format so that you can see every change.
Okay. Now I'd also like to add a discussion point on the certificates obligation policy whenever
Okay.
we get there.
All right.
I've got a couple of things. On the grants and intergovernmental agency revenues, approximately on average, what amount does Pearland get each year from federal or state grants?
Oh, I cannot tell you that, but Mr. Joel Hardy, do you know that number?
I'm just trying to get an idea.
Sure. So the grant fund itself is probably a smaller representation of all the federal and state grant dollars we receive, and that can fluctuate anywhere from $400,000 or $500,000 to $750,000, $1 million. But we do have federal funds that come from TxDOT that probably total close to $100 million, and the water board money that we receive for the wastewater treatment plants and other similar projects probably is a little bit over $200 million. But we don't calculate those dollars in the grant fund itself, so it's a much smaller
Okay.
fund.
Thank you. The other thing on the section on financial consultants says that we keep the auditors for 7 years, and we pay whatever their rate is for 7 years. Is it a fixed rate for those 7, or?
It is generally a fixed rate. If they want to increase, we usually negotiate that amount, and we do not go a certain percentage over what council has approved. It looks like the audit costs have remained about the same for the last 3 years. We did take a look at that.
Okay, 7 years seems like a long time to be locked in with one group.
And we
That's
can
my-
change
that's
that.
my opinion. I think, at the most 5 years, but 7 years or without, going out and getting more bids seems
Okay.
like a long time.
All right.
And we have that 7 years is the required rotation, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
we could change if we had issues. I think we have in the past. If we had issues with a firm, we could change firms. at
Yes, sir. We
2
can
years.
change firms, and if we feel that there's too much comfort there, we can also request that they change our partners. We can request that they change their entire audit team and bring us new people on board within that 7-year period.
So as was mentioned, we'll bring this back, in the next couple months, but if there's other topics or parameters that you want us to look at, this is the kind of thing that helps us and being sensitive to that. And so when we drop something on you, it's not cold and that, within some boundaries, and we flag things like you talked about for highlighting, explaining, why we looked at that a little bit harder.
Is this discussion item inclusive of the internal service funds, or are we going to talk about that?
This is strictly to the financial policies. I think we've got some other topics for the internal service funds down the road here.
Okay, again, just reiterating that the recurring expenses, just giving us some general parameters, where we are and what we'd like to change to, and kind of seeing what that stresses our overall budget, would help a lot.
Just some clarity, you mean recurring expenses when we're determining a fund balance, or?
Yeah, so right now we're on operating expenses, and I believe
Right.
we were going to change it to only recurring expenses, if I remember correctly.
I think it's both in there. Actually, it didn't say recurring operating expenses. I mean, and frankly, we've used a percentage the last couple of years just for simplicity. The recurring is in case, which makes sense if we did have a year we had a large, like we had the hurricane. So we would not call that a recurring expense when we're calculating that.
Yeah.
If we had budgeted, that's probably not the best example.
I
but-
presume the idea is that if we move forward on the internal service funds, that's a fund source for non-recurring expenses, for emergency expenses, and then we have only non-recurring operating expenses in our fund balance. I'm presuming that that's the strategy, or is?
Generally, yeah.
Okay. So, but just kind of seeing what that value would be, maybe as a projection over the next few years based on our assumptions, just so we can see what the difference, what the delta would be.
Mr. Owens is teeing up.
On the write-off and uncollectible, where do we stand on that, mainly on the water and sewer?
I'm sorry, what was that? What the?
It's on page 9 at the bottom down there, write-off and uncollectible.
Oh, right off.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would like to say is that we have very few write-offs, maybe $14,000 or something like that. They're minimum.
It's pretty minimal right now. In the beginning, when we first started doing, there was a large write-off. We've been doing it every year, so now it's I don't know, about maybe $3,000 a year or so.
I know at one time it was pretty high balance.
Yeah, it was. It was close to, like, I believe 100,000.
Those still stay in there with the individual's name or whatever, if they move to another location, if that has to be paid.
Do you know that?
Yes, because if they move to another location, we have to note on the account that they move to another location.
Yeah, it is noted in the system,
Yeah,
in
so
our
if they
software.
have an unpaid balance, of quite a bit, and especially on the commercial stuff, if they go and locate another area or another house, you then barely have to pay that unpaid balance off before they get water.
We would get that amount, is that not right? Right.
What we usually do is we get put on payment plan.
Yeah, we would contact them, put them on a payment plan if that's what they need to do in order to recover that.
I know at one time there was some pretty high balances in there, especially on the commercial, on that stuff like that. When people left out didn't pay it. I don't know if they ever come back and re-open the business here or whatever, but tracking that, it's pretty hefty number at one time. So
Right. I can get, if you like, I can get more detail on that process and get back to you, but
well, it's
it
good
is.
here. It's not as large a number as it used to be. So
And
that's good.
The policy does state that it's an entry only. It doesn't release the debtor from any of the liability, so it's still sitting out there, and we collect it at any chance.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's more of an accounting side entry, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Anything else for policies, practices?
I think, well, I know Councilmember Carbone had mentioned the reciprocal obligation, but perhaps maybe some better definitions of what I would like to look for. Are there other cities that put in an ordinance a limit of what can and can't be CO'd? What are the boundaries that maybe similar cities put on that, and how loose or limiting they are? If there's a policy that we may be able to adopt or some structure to it.
Okay, I have not seen that or heard of it, but I can do some research and find out if there are other cities with such policies. Generally, they just follow the law about what you can and can't do. If it hasn't been voter approved, then you can do it as the CO as long as you follow the state laws.
I mean, even if it is that. And
Okay.
we've
But I
got
can
no
find
seats
it.
that we've found also no cities that have anything we can follow. So if we're going to restrict ourselves as the use of COs, we're going to have to cut it from both law.
Okay.
I find that that's the,
Okay, perfect. We'll put something together for you.
Thank you.
On page 7, budget management. Clay, maybe you can talk about this a little bit on managing the debt formally adopted by the council and moving money from one area in the budget, even across department lines and what have you. I know what it says, so, but I guess what's been used in the past, is there a dollar amount that's limited prior to being able to do that, to come back in council and ask permission to do that?
Like you said, council adopts at a fund level. As a practical matter, we report, quarterly and monthly on budget variances and any topics or issues that we're watching or have dealt with. And then the council sees, expenditures over the on the purchasing policy, and that would really drive, if there was something that forced a large expenditure that had been budgeted, which required a fund balance, we deal with it at that time. So that's really, how we generally true those up and describe those.
Okay, and I see here that you may delegate that to somebody else to do that
Okay.
on the transfer of funds.
Yes, sir. The charter dictates that the legal level of budget control is at the is at the fund level. So the city manager has the authority to approve transfers throughout a fund. And when it comes from one fund to another, then it has to be brought to council, and that is how we have operated historically.
I guess my concern about that, I was with the city of Houston for 13 years and done budgets every year. And of course, that's a bigger area over there doing that. But the big concern was that we would, put in information that the council would approve the budget. And then, of course, they put higher dollars in the police, fire, and EMS, because we call those heartstrings, in there, because people would not go against any of those budget dollars that were put in there. Then after the budget was approved, the mayor and the directors would sit down and take money out of those 3 pockets there and move them into someplace else.
That has not happened since I've been here, and I have not seen that. We're looking back historically. Our city manager conducts the budget as it's adopted. He doesn't change it.
Yeah, and that's just one of the things that always concerned me, is because this is an adopted budget by the mayor and city council and approved and on that. So that's
Well, I can tell you, I've not seen that here. I've not seen that in any smaller entity that I've been associated with.
I'm glad to hear that.
I wouldn't compare us to them.
No,
We're not them.
Well, no, I know that. But stranger things happen. Okay.
All right.
One of those.
Sorry.
Just, I took some explanation on page 9. The one-time unpredictable revenue sources. What are those?
Those are revenue sources that will come in that we did not budget because we did not anticipate receiving them. I believe we had one last year that was a little bit over $1 million, and it may have come from TxDOT, if I recall correctly. So we wouldn't have budgeted it. So it's a one-time revenue source. We don't expect to get it again.
We had a sale of land, so that was the perfect example. And we dealt with that, and we flagged that during the budget and said, I can't remember how we designated it. Maybe that's 2 years ago, we put some money into the shored up the self-insurance fund. So we flagged those when those come in. And then there was another thing I remember since I've been here. We got reimbursements from TxDOT for some engineering, and I think there's some additional monies that weren't designated, so that kind of stuff.
Good. All right.
Do you feel like we should just continue the policy of just dealing with those as one-offs and
Yeah.
come back to council, so let's
Yeah.
have a standing policy of what we do with additional revenue?
Well, the policy actually, and I remember referencing this, was for increasing fund balance, capital equipment purchases. So I think it makes sense as a general, and we could always, if there's an extraordinary circumstance we wanted to direct it somewhere else, we could say, hey, here's the policy, but we suggest we look at this instead. So I think it's good enough.
the dollars that we're looking at hopefully one day to get back to FEMA, where do those dollars go into? Do you divide them up between the general fund and enterprise systems?
So it'll come back to where they were spent. So the debris removal was all out of the solid waste fund, so that money will go there. And then the majority of the rest goes to general fund for operating expenses. That's at least that emergency measures category. And then we'll have some water and sewer expenses that'll go to those. So where the money went out, it'll come back into as best we can. Anything from the middle of the table? We're good? All right. So the second topic we wrote up was update on our IT and particularly the enterprise resource software. City's been having dramatic upgrades to our operating systems. We rely upon these day in, day out, and any conversion's tough, but we're made significant progress, and we aren't done. There's the majority of this write-up deals with a work order system that we need to use. We're still improvising with HTE, the old legacy system, and using that, but we need to do better in terms of tracking the work and then tying that back to assets. So, that's going to be another thing that we foresee. And then we touch on the future technology needs, trying to keep those up and not falling behind too much as we go forward. So this is to flag that as a future budget for the work order, and a lot of public works activities out there, water, sewer, et cetera, drives that. So any questions about that, and comfort that at least as best we can fitting that into a future budget, and any other technologies that council wants us to explore?
It's later in the packet. We talk about how many systems we still have. We're running Microsoft 2007. We're still on server 2008. I think that needs to be a priority for this year. Keeping up with that, I think we, with 13 being 3 years old, we probably have very few systems that are on 13. We probably need to get as many of them updated to 16. Many of our office suite programs updated to the current version for security reasons. So I think that really is a priority, and it's something, if we don't prioritize it, it's just going to follow into further disrepair, and we can't have our staff continually getting frustrated because their computers aren't working, and we can't do anything about it. So I'd like to see us prioritize that. I know we recently implemented the new, and I'm forgetting the name of the program that is managing our billing software. I can't remember what that, but
The New World stuff for the water sewer?
exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe some explanation as to, do we need to put any additional funding into fixing the issues that we had historically, or do we feel like we're at the point now where all those issues are resolved? Maybe that's just a memo update, but if we need any additional repair on that, or any additional consulting to get the problems we've had with that resolved, I'd like us to prioritize that so that we can be done with the issues and be done with the people getting double billed or auto drafts not coming out. I know this is more of a staffing issue, but our GIS program, continuing to reinvest in that, the tool is extraordinarily beneficial. We talked briefly about it from a staffing concern, but also from keeping up with the software. Making sure that we're keeping up with that. If it's beneficial for us to be more robust about some AutoCAD licenses, so that we can quickly draft and input data into that as we hire people in the engineering, I'd be fine with a low-end investment there. But I'd like us to try and prioritize keeping up with that software.
So HTE, if I'm reading correct, goes away in 19. Is that end of life? Has it already ended life? Is there any support left?
So we can continue to support it. We can pay year by year for it.
Okay.
The actual hardware and the operating system are going to be, you cannot renew next year.
Okay.
So those will be in the life next year.
Okay, so, I mean, I was kind of shocked that we don't, Excel's kind of our work order system. You know, the tracking for that, I just see the advantage to having an integrated system every day. And I'm hoping I'm hoping there's something we look at that kind of gives us a one solution or two solutions for the city as far as our main information systems. Are there products out there? Is that kind of the direction you're looking at going? Yeah.
So to kind of answer your question, Councilmember Ordino, there are, for the enterprise systems, there's about 4. So police has their own system, fire has their own system. Public Works currently doesn't have a system. We're looking at implementing part of that this fiscal year, and then obviously the write-up for the general fund side for next year. And then the ERP as a whole covers human resources, utility billing, and what's the last one? Finance.
Okay.
And then the one thing I would say is, so that's a very specific piece of software for Public Works in their operations. It's referred to asset management. It's probably better listed as operations management because it encompasses the entire Public Works department versus trying to piggyback off of another piece of software.
Okay. And all these, if I read correct, will tie into GIS?
Yes.
So you'll be able to kind of cross-reference work orders to this area and money
Absolutely.
spent, time spent, all that?
That's the goal, yes.
And I do agree. I use the GIS mapping system on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And I do know development in town. It's just a great piece to go to and see what's happening, what's in that area. So any investment in that goes far beyond what staff uses it for. It's also what the public can use it for and the information they can gain from that system. And kudos to whoever decided to put that out there public years ago, because it's a great tool for the public.
It's frustrating when you're doing research in the city that doesn't have it.
Right.
Because it's pulling teeth, and you got to get a lot of staff time to try and say, I need to find water lines for this roadway, and somebody's got to go find the plans and duplicate the plans and send them out or email them. If you could just look at the map and say there's a 16-inch water line, it saves a lot of staff time. Sorry, one follow-up question just to on the Microsoft software. Mm-hmm. If you could provide an update of what that implementation program would look like, how aggressive we could be. Is that a 1-year period for us to get everything updated? Does that take several years for us to get everybody online and updated? Would we need some temporary staffing, either through a consultant contract or some temporary employees to be able to get that, so we can get a full allocation? I'd like to try and prioritize that as quickly as we could. But if there's a huge cost for us to do it within 1 year, and we've got to program it over a 2 or 3 year period, and see what that obligation is over time, that'd be helpful.
I think there's a white paper a little bit later we'll hit on that goes into quite a bit of that detail. I've got a few comments, but maybe it makes sense to discuss it at that point.
Anything else on the general, the asset management and work orders and?
Just general question to find out. Previously, we've done gas at 34, I guess is what it was, on inventory of all our systems here, and an upgrade for the asset management part of it. Do we know within the city right now the number of lane miles that we have, the number of
Yes, we have all that. It's mostly resides in GIS at this point. The asset management system will tie into that, and then that's where you'll be able to tie your work order system as well as your predictive maintenance and things into the GIS as well with the asset management.
When that was done, was each one of those in a category there of the roadways and the bridge structures, the general condition of those? I mean, I know that sometime it was hard to find, you know, what was actually, you could see what was out there, but you couldn't go back to find the set of plans or drawings or anything on some of that to actually see what the date was.
So, I guess a couple things there. In 2014, that's when we did our first, pavement condition index citywide, and then we've updated that this past year on the asphalt roads only. So that information right now kind of resides separately until we get the asset management system, which then it'll be brought into that. And as far as existing plans and things like that, they're not tied directly in right now, but there is information in the GIS system, so you can click on a sewer line and it'll say it's PVC, here's the depth at the invert in the manhole, and it was built in 2005. So a lot of that information is built into the GIS.
Good.
I guess the last comment I'd have on this section is there's the future technology outlook, and that sounds slick, but I want to look at the cost benefit. I mean, having real-time updates on construction projects is awesome, but the monthly PDFs that get posted to the website do just as fine. So I guess before we go all in on all this, I'd like to at least look at the cost of it.
Yep.
The third paper, we wanted to have some council level, at least awareness. Since I've been here, we've tried to spend a lot of time developing the team and our leadership capacities at all levels. Framework I've used for that, I've got exposed to early on, and comes from the University of Virginia. And so we've sent staff there, and then they all come back, energized and ready to apply those lessons. From that, it's a high performance organization sort of description, and that gives us a common knowledge when we're working with each other, and we talk about how we want to do things. So this is really a capacity building effort, and it takes significant investment in time and money. So we wanted to at least describe that a little bit so you had some awareness of that. This is what I see as building an organization so that we can achieve and accomplish the things that the council and the community wants us to do. We described that methodology a little bit. There's a couple of testimonials that were linked in there that were pretty cool. So I just wanted to, Michelle drafted this, and we talk about some of the future strategies that were in there, some of the things we're going to be working on as years ahead. And so if any council any questions about that or suggestions, et cetera, there's a lot of stuff that goes underneath this umbrella. But I really think this is one of the things that's going to pay off long term, and we won't be able to point necessarily and say, well, because we did this project came off better. But I think it does. All these projects will come off better because of the way we're exercising leadership and staff development and the way we work with each other.
I agree. I think the unfortunate part about municipal staffing is we're probably always going to be understaffed, and we need to develop as much. We need to invest as much in creating efficiencies where we can, and I think this, at least from what I understand, that the program's paid off. I think things like an in-service day or things like creating programs that, as y'all describe it, break down the silos and the barriers between the departments and get everybody working more efficiently, stop duplicating work, or stop having people that are working in the same area at the same time but not cooperatively. Anything we can do to create those efficiencies, I think, is always going to be worth the investment.
I just want to say that it definitely the largest investment we have is staff. It's what makes this city what this city is today, and it's something I'm very proud, and I've been honored to be able to work with the staff. I love the leadership engagement. I like the ideas we're doing to get things and get them throughout the staff level, so the in-service day would allow for that training of the staff that we just don't have the money to send everybody to training. So being able to do that locally, I love that idea. Succession planning, that and what we're doing to make sure everyone feels and understands that they are a vital part of this system, I think ties into the next white paper with when we look at the fact that we do have a staff that a lot of y'all could retire relatively soon. And whatever we can do to keep that knowledge base around will help us save not only funds, but just the mental and the knowledge base that we have in staff right now. Losing that all at one time is not a good thing, and we need to make sure we do these things to make sure staff understands their value, what they bring to the city, and keep y'all around as long as we can. So I loved both of these two white papers, very well done, and some great ideas.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I've only been on council for a short while, but one of the things that impressed me the most was the staff and how professional and how competent they are. Just out of curiosity, how many of the middle and senior level managers have attended this LEAD program? Wow, okay. Most of you, okay. And you're going to kind of transition this then to your LEAP program, is that correct?
Yes, sir. We have sent to date probably between 18 and 20 of our senior level and mid-level staff, and there have been a group of us that have been looking at how to incorporate some of those lessons learned and those topics discussed at LEAD and creating this internal training program that you're referring to that we called LEAP in the binder. But yes, we are looking at creating kind of a homegrown so that we can disseminate that information and that theory and that concept throughout the organization without the additional expense of sending staff to the LEAD program. That being said, we still would like to be able to commit to send people to there because it is a very different experience and it does add value, but we would like to be able to do both moving forward.
Michelle, before you sit down, I think training of staff is something you really have to do. I wish it was in Texas. With that many people that have attended that so far, I mean, is there anything we could do with partnering with the U of H, Rice, A&M, Texas, University of Texas, Baylor, or whoever, to partner to start that within the Texas area?
I don't know that we have explored that idea. This concept that it exists at UVA is a very unique experience. The level of the instructors, the quality of the experience, the quality of the location. I don't know that it could be duplicated quickly. I think that's why we're looking at continuing to send people there as we can, senior level managers, mid-level managers, and wanting to bring something internally into the organization itself. We could look at those options, but to date we have not.
I was just thinking, as many people that we have attended, that we could group that information together and get with some university or TTI or whoever, HGAC, and talk about putting a program together to develop that. I don't know, is any other cities in our general area doing that now?
To my knowledge, not to the level that we are effectively doing it.
The only other thing I would say is we've used the University of Houston before for a certified public managers program. There are a number of state programs that are available. We have that we've investigated and sent people to, but this is, as Michelle stated, is a very intense program that it has a whole different process involved with it. The other thing I would say is twice we brought one of those individuals here to meet with staff so that we could do just that, reduce the amount of cost to the organization.
And while the program is at the university, it's actually done through a Weldon Cooper Center for Public Policy, so it's housed at the university, but it's a special program within that university that has produced this.
Michelle, just not to dive too much into the details, but just to better understand what we want to do with LEAP. On the 6-month time frame, are we thinking cyclical 6-month time frames for a class and meshing people from several departments in a singular class, or are we talking implementing department by department over 6-month time frames?
No, what we would envision would be, we've done something similar. We called it the Strategic Supervisor Series, where a variety of people from different departments could be involved. I would envision that same kind of concept, that we would have people that would sign up for the class, go through the program over a 6-month period of time, do a project, things like that. So it wouldn't be department by department. I think that's one of the effective things that has happened with us sending people to the LEAD program. They have come back and done some things within their department that's been effective. This would be to get to those kind of mid-level and throughout the organization with an internal program, so it would be open to a variety of people from different departments to participate each time.
And would we be thinking this is an after-hours program for non-exempt employees, or would we have to compensate in the funding for overtime or make up staffing while people are gone during the day?
No, and the reason for the 6-month time frame would be that we would want to allocate staff time. Maybe it's an hour a week, maybe it's an hour and a half a week, or 2 hours a week over that long period of time, so that it could be done on a workday without a big impact to operations.
Like a lunch and learn kind of program?
Conceptually, that could be the case, yes.
Okay. And do we have a threshold yet of what level of staff we're going to we would prioritize for that, or we still need to consider?
The level of planning has not gone into that kind of detail yet.
Okay.
We're at the conceptual level to getting support and buy-in for something like that.
Well, I'm all for it, so whatever we need.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. You talked about inter-department or bringing departments together. I know in my organization, that's one of the best things that we've done on a small level is talking to other departments and understanding how they work and how they impact. And I think if we can get that knowledge base, or the more we can get that knowledge base throughout the city, the better we all are, because we understand the challenges. And when I do X in my department, it affects this other department by Y, and I need to be aware of that. So I love that idea. And again, thank y'all for everything you're doing for the staff.
Yeah, I mean, you can't compliment it enough, the idea. And I think one of the other added benefits is people don't realize how big the city is. We have north of 700 employees. When you mix in people from different departments and have them have the opportunity to network with each other, there's an additional cost savings in the fact that these guys already know who to talk to when they run into an issue. And then somebody from the engineering department that's dealing with some traffic issues may need to find information related to accidents, and now they know exactly who to talk to. They save the time, or at least they know that there's a resource available. I don't think we can compliment this idea enough. So absolutely, we need to move forward.
The number of people that are at time to retire are good, that you identified in here. Are any of those in these training programs or not?
Well, maybe I'll transition to that. I'll answer that too, probably. But part of the dynamic in this next paper, talk about workforce planning, is that we want to provide opportunity, encouragement for people to stay as long as they feel like they're able and contributing, et cetera. And one of the ways I'm sure you can do that, I know you can do that, is to provide them new challenges and opportunities and training. So, we would never shut off that, and I know that's not what you're saying, but we've got people at all levels and all experience levels that are, integral to our success. So, we need to keep that. And, as you said, was mentioned, our biggest expense by far is personnel, and we expect a lot of them, and the world is changing and expectations, so we need to keep people trained if we want to expect them to do more. We got to give them the right tools. So, we provide a whole array of training, technical stuff, entry level, local, kinds of experiences, and then all the way up onto this. So it's a full menu. And one of the things that Michelle's trying to get her arms around is to organize all that and make sure that we get that pushed out and communicated to staff and make sure they're aware of that and they know the paths that are available for promotion and growth. I know that too is one of the things that makes us attractive for people when they're looking to come to an organization is, the high performers are going to want to come to a place that values training and development. And so we show that and that word gets around.
Yeah, I think it's good to be able to do that. And the reason I asked that, a lot of companies put out and do a lot of training. And once they get trained, the people up and leave and go somewhere else for more money. And so, that's just a normal that's on the
I think it's organization life, yeah.
Local government.
Yeah.
It's more on, on our side of the engineering side, you send people to a lot of these different schools and a lot of training and stuff like that. And it really, embellishes their resume and their capabilities, and people come out to seek those people out. And so that's why in the private sector, a lot of them, if you do that, and they do the training, they have to go sign something to go for a number of years after that, or they have to pay the money back that's being spent on them in that particular training.
And we do have those kinds of things in place for education reimbursement and things like that. When we send people to trainings that are more expensive, we do have that that reimbursement agreement. And another way to look at what you're saying, I do understand the thought, if we train them and what if they leave? If we don't train them, what if they stay? So that's kind of the theory that we kind of go on.
Yeah, I've not seen that much in the public sector, but in the private sector, it's that way. But the private sector, with everything that's going on today, they're coming into the public sector and getting people out. That's quite a bit difference in the salary than what they're making in the public sector.
So the fourth paper touched on a couple elements, and that's one, we point out, as was mentioned, the fact that there are people that are maybe eligible to retire. I don't want to get too carried away with that because there's lots of factors that go into that. I could retire, but I'd be destitute. But there's, that's reality. And one of the things I think the police department in particular has done is looked at succession planning. We need to formalize that organization-wide and have plans and paths for people. I think this all kind of ties together so that they know that there's a future or what the options are. Maybe not know for certain, but at least have some ideas about that. So we'd like some help to do that, bring that citywide. And then there's also a piece about the retirement health care, and there's this financing requirements and talking about OPEB and explicit subsidies and implicit. I believe we've touched on that in prior budgets. So that's coming more real. And we want to push out a little bit more aggressively to retirees, some options and information about retirement options. We've not had great success in getting people to look at that so far, but so that's all talked about in here, and would like to know if council has any questions or thoughts on this topic.
A couple. How necessary would the study be for us to create a succession plan? It's a $45,000 investment. It certainly wouldn't break the budget, but do we have capabilities internally to be able to develop a program similar to what they may recommend? It's kind of a loaded question, so I apologize.
As you had mentioned earlier, public sector, we are a little strapped for staff. We typically are. Do we have the ability? Probably. Do we have the capacity? No.
Okay.
To follow up, when we do get back to staffing, you're requesting 4 new full-time equivalents in HR. So I guess I'd be more inclined to maybe bring on some additional employees if we could allocate some of the time and save $45,000 on a consultant that the end of the day will likely come in and piss us off when we see what we paid 45 grand for.
And I would be open to that discussion.
And I think that's a good way of looking at it. Would we rather spend the $45,000 and add an employee and maybe concentrate on getting an employee that has some similar experience that we could use, and maybe the first 3 months we have that guy or girl on, we utilize them to develop this, and then then we have the staff member in place. The other question in the explicit subsidy and the implicit subsidy when we're talking about retiree benefits, healthcare benefits, and we put in quote costs on the implicit subsidy where we have 100% covered, but the costs are defined differently. Can you help explain what the difference is in those costs and why that would bring the implicit lower than the explicit? If I'm reading this correctly, if I'm misunderstanding what was in there.
I thought Robert was going to try to answer that, so.
It would have been interesting.
Yeah, what are you doing? I thought he was smarter than that, so.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Perez, can you repeat the question? I was trying to type your comments from the last question.
I apologize. So when we're talking about the implicit and explicit subsidization of employees, retirees for their health care, we define the explicit as 80% of the total cost paid to the city, 20% remaining health care costs paid by the retiree. Then we have the implicit where we pay 100%, but the quote costs are defined differently. And then it says as a result lowering the amount. So is it that we pay 100% but we give them lesser benefits? Or I'm just missing the disconnect between that.
No, and the example that you're referring to when it talks about the 80 and the 20, that's kind of a for instance, it's an example. So right now we have our insurance premiums are based on a blended rate. So we take our employees' information and our retiree information. It's not separated out. So we say that this is the rate for our health insurance. By doing more of an explicit subsidy, we would be factoring the health care rates differently. You would factor your health care rates based on your employee population and your retiree population. And then your policy would state that based on their either time in service or whatever recommendation we end up coming back with that you approve, would be, okay, if this is the rate, then the city agrees to subsidize 20%, 30%, whatever that policy decision gets to be. So then it's explicit. Right now, it's a blended rate, but the cost for the services is, I think, was 344% per capita to our employee expense.
Generally makes sense.
So the retirees are more expensive, right?
Yeah.
But they're all getting lumped in together, so the cost we charge out for the regular employees is slightly higher because it's got this.
And that kind of leads into the other question where, I mean, in theory, we could have a retiree who's 38 years old. Has there been a conversation, and if not, should we have a conversation of how we vary the benefits for the 38-year-old as opposed to the 65-year-old? I mean, I don't feel he's got a lot of life left, working life left. I don't know a whole lot of 38-year-olds, particularly with the salary that they're likely having at the end of 20 years when they started at 18, that are not going to go out and find another job. If there's a way that we can say, look, we're not going to take care of your insurance from 38 to 65, but once you hit 65, that will kick in.
That conversation has happened, and that was kind of the catalyst for this discussion. What we are waiting for is the financial implications. They're working on some financial information to say which criteria we may want to move forward with, because it'll tell you in the memo what we currently have for retiree insurance, and we are looking at those options for points, whether it's length of service within the organization combined with age and that kind of thing. Right now, the only requirement is 20 years within the TMRS system,
Yeah.
which means that you realistically could have somebody that's 38, that has 20 years in TMRS, that can retire and is eligible. So that's what we're looking at, is changing the way we have our retiree eligibility.
And we give credit to military service and service with other TMRS programs, correct?
TMRS does have a program that they allow for that, so
in-
yes.
In theory, we could have somebody who's worked for us for 5 years, got in the military 15 years, came and worked for us for 5 years, gave us 5 years of use, and then we're obligated to them for the remainder of their life from 38 to however long. Is that somewhat?
That's correct.
So I'm interested to see, I know what's bankrupting a lot of the cities, that particularly ones that didn't participate in TMRS, is the obligations they made to retirees, like, we can't pay you now, but we'll pay you later. And that just becomes a debt that they can't afford to pay, and they have people who are retired that are depending on that revenue, and they can't deal with it. I don't want to break any promises to people we made the promises to. But if we can restructure it to prevent us from having too much of a debt obligation by, if you're early in retirement, we'll kick in these benefits, but not until your retirement age. I don't know if there's, it's oversimplified, but if there is a tool to do that, I'd like to explore it.
Just to be clear, I don't want to leave the impression on the table. We're in good shape as far as retirees. We are in TMRS. We're not getting out, and you pay in what you get out. I mean, it's basically a pay-as-you-go sort of scenario. So there's not people, spiking up pensions, et cetera. That's, creating a long-term city obligation. It's all part of this big program, and it works well.
Yeah,
so.
but that doesn't cover the insurance. That covers the retirement.
So then the
payment, but
insurance,
the
yeah,
insurance
right.
is
But you
different.
touched on the retirement, so I didn't want anybody thinking.
Yeah,
we
no,
had
the
those.
Retirement plan we have is healthy. TMRS is healthy, and I didn't want that to be the misperception. That is not the case. What we're looking at is encouraging people to stay with the organization longer and before they can get those health care benefits. It doesn't have to do with the retirement program itself. It's the health care that's related to that.
Yeah, I'm concentrating on the healthcare. If we feel we're comfortable and we have a rarity of the people that are, 30 years of still healthy life, and we're not having to pay into their insurance, I'm fine with that answer. It just seems like a kind of a disconnect for me that there are people that are going to go out, they're going to continue to work. How much are we contributing to their health insurance when they're, quote, retired from us? And is that a burden that we should address? But I appreciate TMRS as a healthy program. I don't want us to revisit that just on the health insurance for those retirees.
So my question is people are living a lot longer now after retirement. So, I mean, as far as planning goes, are we planning for, I don't know, that we had, I can't remember what the number was here, on the retirement that we expect to see in the next 10 years, lumping that in with the actual age of people living afterwards. I mean, as far as funding, are we good with that kind of time period of overlapping of retirement versus mortality rate and age, and so on?
Okay, if I'm understanding your question correctly, what we're looking at is restructuring when people are eligible to receive a subsidy for their health care. One of the other parameters, somewhere in the memo, it indicates that we're looking at a mandatory switch at 65 because then you're eligible for Medicare. So that mandate is currently not in place. We don't have that where they have to switch to Medicare. So we're looking at putting some of those things in place to encourage people to stay within the organization, receive a benefit for staying with the organization, but also looking at being fiscally responsible in the long term and managing those costs.
So at 65, try to get them to go to Medicare.
That is one of the recommendations that I would expect that will come back to council when we have a full recommendation with financial implications.
Okay.
As much as it pains me, I have to admit I agree with Councilman Perez on looking at the guidelines, age and years of service for providing the health care benefits. But on another note, since we're in the first waves of the silver tsunami, and you're expecting about 20-plus people per year to retire over the next 10 years, how does that compare to pre-tsunami, silver tsunami years? On average, how many people leave employment of the city annually?
We've had maybe 2 to 3 that have actually retired. Eligibility is there, but like Mr. Pearson said, there's a lot of things that play into people's decisions to retire. So if we've had 3 to 4, 2 to 4 a year, potentially, what's different now is the potential to retire is getting much higher.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Just a quick questions, a couple of them, I guess, in there. Based upon that, just devil's advocate, somebody retires, they stay with the city's health insurance. They go to work somewhere else. They save about $600 a month for not being part of their insurance or the company they go through on that. The other part of it is when they reach 65, whatever, to come in, during that period of time, they're still paying into Medicare, Medicaid, whatever. But I guess at that point in time, at that age, it's better for them to go on that probably. It's still, I'm there. So the thing about it, I still, on Medicare and Medicaid, for me and the wife, I still pay, I think about $500 something a month on that. I guess it is. So there's plenty of options out there. Of course, Cobra wasn't that good when I was on that. It was $1,700 a month on Cobra, on that part of it. But as the individual goes out, you have to look at what you're getting for the money that you're putting out, on your retirement and our forest share insurance and stuff. So I guess, do you look at a mandatory date, that they have to come off the insurance or they stay on it? And I mean, if you can go ahead and stay on the city's insurance program and get Medicare and Medicaid, that's a pretty good deal. I mean, yeah.
And that's why we're looking at these different options to bring to you, because we don't have the ability to implement those at this point. Our eligibility is what it is, and we're looking at alternatives to that eligibility for those very reasons.
Yeah, I know most other places, or some of the other places, the bigger cities, you got to have a combination of 70 years age plus number of years working with that agency. I think that's the way it is. And most of those are very hard to find a solvent retirement plan across the country, though. Okay, that's my question.
All right, Mr. Carbone, have one more? Yep.
Yeah, a couple quick comments. So we talk about the GASB 45 and the OPEB liability. I guess going forward, I don't want to get hung up on this OPEB liability that we have to disclose that's not a true cost to the city. So I agree with kind of the discussion that we've had. Let's look at it, but let's not get tied up that we've got some phantom liability we have to disclose. I mean, it's not hurting our bond ratings. So let's look at the hard costs. And then also, I mean, we talk about this silver tsunami, but then we're fixing a jack with retirees' health insurance. I want to make sure that we don't inadvertently, as we're trying to solve this issue, create a date certain that we're going to see half the 200 that are eligible walk out the door all at once. I don't know what that looks like, but that could certainly occur. That's all I have.
Good, thanks. So the next paper, we've talked about internal service funds, probably more than we should talk, but it's here, and the challenge, frankly, is we've jump started into such a large and complex organization. To go now and create some of these is a challenge, just financially, structurally, to get our heads around it, and so we're back, outlining again that we've got an opportunity and probably a need to set up some accounting mechanisms with these internal service funds for our citywide fleet. For facilities, we're underinvested there. We suffer greatly by not taking care of all that business. And then technology, the heart really keeps us running. So, we've discussed that and show some examples of a couple places that have had those set up. How we get from here to there is really the several $million question. And we're trying to, keep that on the radar, let you know that we are interested and want to see the need for that, but, trying to transition into that, particularly on some of the more expensive items like the capital replacement fund is just a large financial nut to handle, and we're trying to keep up and build up on our day-to-day operations. So that's what this paper says, and welcome any questions or encouragements or bullets in this if you don't want us to talk about it anymore.
My general question is, from accounting purpose, it's a siloed amount of money from our general fund, but the money's fungible. There's nothing that would say if we create a motor pool fund, it's got $200,000, we can't borrow from that Peter to pay another Paul, correct?
You could.
It's
our internal service fund. We could, that's one of the good things, frankly, is that, if priorities changed or we got in a huge crisis, it's our monies. It's not like it's obligated from another source. We'd have to account for it, between enterprise funds and those kinds of things. But the worst case, it's not like you're putting in a complete lockbox that could never be seen again.
I from an accounting standpoint and from a budgetary standpoint, as we go in here and as we go through these cycles and we say, look, if there's been an adjustment in the budget, we're going to have to take out of the motor pool fund to deal with this sidewalk program. That's how I can see how that opens this council and future council's eyes to how are you actually sacrificing it. I don't know personally if the additional benefit of having the accounting department have to keep track of each of the individual funds is worth that benefit, at least to me. I can see it in the budget that, hey, we're underfunding sidewalks and we're overfunding this program. Something's got to give. I would say it's either or for me as far as the amount of money that we keep in reserve. Either we keep a reserve based on an estimate of what our 2 or 3 month expenses are for the previous year, which accounts for some of the unpredicted expenses, or we say non-recurring operating funds, and then we silo, because I don't want to do both. I don't want to we're basing it on non-recurring expenses, and we're also budgeting off non-recurring expenses, because then it's kind of a belt and suspenders as I see it. For me, it's not a huge priority. I think it would stress our already stressed financial staff or financing staff to try and keep track of all of these. I know we have a bunch of escrowed accounts for pro rata shares that are hard to keep track of as well. So I don't really think it's a necessity. I wouldn't go against it if the rest of the council wanted it, but I don't really think that we need to do it.
Well, the accounting for it's not, once setting up, it's not going to be hard, and it's more stress, frankly, to get to budget time, and we're underfunding some of these areas, trying to get the money for investing in some of these things that are kind of silent, that creep up on you if they're not addressed year over year. And then the other part of it is when you have a large capital equipment, if you had a large piece of public works equipment or fire truck that's $1 million, trying to finance that. We shouldn't, in my mind, be borrowing for a fire truck as big as we are, but we've had to just because we haven't had money set aside to build up for that. So, the accounting piece and technically is not that hard. It's more, trying to get the monies over that. And it's different than what you said in terms of the fund balances and those kinds of things. So they really work separately. You'd have a fund there that you'd build up and handle the regular investments year to year, plus have and recognize the depreciation and be able to handle, large equipment, $1 million piece of equipment when those come up.
But I'll defer if finance thinks that this is a good program and it doesn't overstress their staff and it's easy to keep up with it, that's fine. We're not talking about additional revenue sources. We're talking about taking general funds and then just siloing the funds for particular areas so that when we have to make a decision, it's more open-eyed. Hey, we're going to have to take out of this fire truck fund, so next year we better reimburse it because we got to buy a fire truck. I think that's a conversation we can have from budget year to budget year. If it's a trivial matter to create the funds and it's fungible and it doesn't stress staff, then I wouldn't say I'm for it, but I mean, I can acquiesce to the argument, but I just don't see the benefit. Not as of yet.
Others down the table?
You know, what I see the benefit of is since I've been on council, I've heard and I've supported paying out of pocket, being able to do more without taking on debt, and some form of this is the only way you get there. So I honestly don't have as many concerns about what the form is, but I do want to see us move in that direction of having a fund that this body can go to and pull when we need something that costs, you know, the figures we're looking at here. I agree. The fact that we can't go out and buy a pumper truck, we know we're going to have to do it. Police vehicles, we know what that looks like. And the fact that we're not saving or siloing or whatever you want to call those funds to allow us to do that without going into debt, I just never have understood. So I like the idea. I think it's something we need to move forward with, and I think it's in the best interest of everyone in the city.
I don't disagree. I'm kind of responsive to the white paper that's further in the back that talks about how understaffed our finances are, our finance department is, and I don't want to take away from. I don't want to overstress them if this is over going to stress them. I don't see it's hugely beneficial, and if it's not necessarily a capital cost, but if it's a resource cost, if it's a human resource cost, I think we can deal with it up here as long as if finance thinks it's fine and it's not going to, huh?
It will not stress staff.
If it's not going to stress staff, then I'm fine with setting it up.
We want it.
Okay. If you want it, then I'll go with it. If you think it's beneficial to you.
Anybody on the other end of the table going to chime in? We've got more accountants, Mr.
Just a question. So we set up the fleet fund, I don't know, 2 years ago? A year ago?
Maybe a year ago, we put some money into it, and that was very, very limited.
Yeah. So we started that about a year ago. Does staff see that that's beneficial? Has it helped at all? And with knowing what we've done with that, does it make sense to do more of these?
I'd say it was such a tiny amount, and it was $200,000. We spend that on 4 police squads, and we replace 16 a year more. So, you know, it's really not. It's not a good indicator yet. Yeah. I'd point council to page 41 where they show a page from that's McKinney, but those are the kinds of things that you know, the roof replacements, the vehicles, but then you got a public works street sweeper that you don't get every year. If you have a fleet fund, you know, you're putting money aside, and so you're not stressing the budget each year, and you know you're planning these things and you're anticipating them. But the problem, as I said at the beginning, is trying to carve out money to build that up. You know, when we're, you know, every budget, you know, we're just paying for the day-to-day, and we're not even doing what we would all like to do there. So that's the real problem, the challenge we're at. But we got to identify that, and I think we got to start to tuck away a little bit of money. You know, we made a tiny down payment with that 200, and that had even more fences around it with police vehicles. But that's kind of the idea we got to get to.
So
okay, thank you.
So each subsequent budget year, we would get a report of all these, each of these funds, what the fund balance is, maybe what the expenditure is, and we'd adjust the fund balance each year to deal with what we think the average expenditures are going a year. So, I mean, I guess I'm hearing from you, Clay, that this is kind of you feel this is more on the need end than the want end?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a longer term need. Again, it's not gonna. It's about trying to build for future budgets, and we're doing future councils and policymakers and staff a favor by starting this.
Okay.
I guess you touched on one play that I just wanted to get some clarification on. Using McKinney, we're using that as an example because they do the different funds. We're not comparing Pearland to McKinney, Texas, are we?
They're just, it's a big city even that I'm aware of, and they're pretty progressive, and, they're a generation ahead of us maybe on the growth curve. So, we look at them, and
The next page is League City.
and League City's next page if you don't like that one. So.
But that is what I was wanting to find out. If I know that they probably have all these different funds set up, and so that's an example you're going by. You're not comparing us,
Yeah, I'm not hung up on where. I mean, I could pull up 100 cities and show you the same thing. So.
Most cities. Good. Yeah, McKinney's a lot different from us, being in the Fort Worth, Dallas metro area, so that's the only thing I was wondering about.
No, I think we need to move forward with it, and just to clarify, we haven't stood up the motor pool fund yet.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's in the general fund. We got a little allocation. It hasn't even. I don't think it's shown up in our budget reports or anything like that. You're right. Yeah, Mr. McCarter. So you're right.
Staff wants it. Staff says it's not going to be a big tax on their resources. So let's plan on it.
So if we do it, we just need I think we need a clarification of its implementation. Are we talking about we're going to set up all these funds this year and we're going to allocate from the general fund for each of these, or are we going to do a slow investment into each of these until we get a fund balance, and how that impacts how that impacts the budget? And it's probably a couple of options. So if you just throw a couple of options at us, so we know how we can implement it.
So on 39, we talked about first step fund policy and get that going and set up the parameters for that, and then motor pool and buildings facilities would probably be the first couple that we'd set up, and then down the road future technology and other kinds of things. So. All right. Page 43, the next one is a debt overview, everybody's favorite topic. And, it's something we definitely are aware of and keep an eye. Councils keenly. We report on this and talk about this at budget, outside of budget, every time we go to issue debt financing. The fact is that the city's growth curve and where we're at, we're leveraged with debt expenditures, in large part voter approved from the 07 and other bond issues. All those improvements that we're seeing and enjoying are necessary, and but the maintenance side, the O&M operations, that's been squeezed, and that ratio has gotten better over the last several years, as is laid out there on page 44. The city can handle the debt, and it's getting, the debt service piece has gone down because our tax base has grown so much, and just something we want to report on and make you aware of it, obviously, and see the different dynamics of that. It is complex in terms of a lot of moving parts, components of that, and that's all laid out here in this paper. So, Mr. Ordino?
I'd say, look, I don't think there's really too many of us up here that aren't debt averse. I know Keith and I have had long conversations about pay-as-you-go, but right now it's a reality. Right now we're talking about how can we implement a bond without having to have a revenue component to the bond based on our ability to take on the debt with the existing or near existing rates that we have. I think it's we wish we were going in a different direction, but right now it's a reality. I think we also as a council need to accept this as a urgency, because as we come into the next legislative session, it's going to be a priority for the legislators to try and further limit our ability not just to generate revenue, but also they're talking about putting limitations on how we can bond. So I'm concerned that if we get too conservative right now, we may and I have the ability in the future to make up the difference. I hate us taking on more debt, but the reality is we have a backlog of projects, and I don't know if we can do anything if we have the capability of going another direction.
Start with the positive, and I do when I looked at this chart, I was happy to see the debt service to operations and that ratio starting to move in what I feel is the right direction, and getting over 30, low 30s. We're getting into the mid 30s to the upper 30% going towards operation instead of debt service. And I mean, debt service, as has been stated, it builds the infrastructure, it builds the things we have. If you don't have that operations piece, you can't maintain what you've built, and you're wasting the money of previous generations that built it if we can't maintain it. It makes more sense to maintain than it does to replace. So I'm glad to see that going that way. A lot of us in the room can remember before 2008, and that's the only thing I can really knock this chart on is I always want to remind people, we look at the tax rate and we say it's slowly inching up. If you go back to the 90s, mid-90s, when the growth started, tax rate was almost 90 cents. And it got slashed drastically, and in my opinion, that's where we got these ratios out of whack. Is when we started relying on some debt service and paying things off long term instead of paying more off as you go. And I don't want to see a 90-cent tax rate, but I do want to see us get these ratios back. So I'm glad to see they're moving in the direction I wanted to see, and I thank staff for those recommendations, and I hope this body continues to move in that direction. On page 45, I do like the comparison. The problem is when you go with taxes, and I would urge the state to realize this as well, is just showing city property taxes is not a fair comparison of what the tax cost of living in any city is. This is strictly cities. It doesn't have MUDs. It doesn't have other special districts. And there's cities on this list that have used those special districts or used other funding mechanisms that don't show up on their property tax value to allow for that property tax to be low. Although it's good, I do wish that we had another way to measure and not just look at property tax, because it doesn't show the whole picture.
I don't know what we could do though.
So, but, an idea I've had forever, and we can't do it, the state would have to, but look at total cost per square foot of taxes. Instead of doing a dollar value, instead of doing anything else, per square foot, what does a resident pay in property tax? And MUD and, overall. And to me, that's a fair way to do it, but we can't do that. So it's not worth talking about in any detail, because that would have to be done statewide.
Yeah, I mean, as far as how it's evaluated, we could probably put together a chart that said that. I don't know how much effort that would be put into it. I agree that, it's kind of an unfair comparison, because the tax rate is just how much money what we're setting the tax rate to be to generate a certain amount of revenue. To Councilmember Owen's point, McKinney is a city that we're compared to, but McKinney has an evaluation near double ours. They can generate the same amount of revenue with half the rate, but you're still paying the same. Your bill is the same. They're paying $1,000. We're paying $1,000. It's just calculated with a number that's different. That's somewhat ancillary. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and this gets into something I'd brought up before. I do want us to, preemptive. I would like us to see preemptive to us going out for the bond, to have guidelines put in place that are set for how certificates of obligation are used, what projects will qualify for that, and some stricter guidelines as to when that tool is going to be used. Because I know Councilmember Carbone has preached about this for years. It's non-voter approved debt. We need to. It's still going onto our rolls as debt This building that we are sitting in here, that we're sitting in, was completely funded by certificates of obligation, so the voters never had a right to say whether they wanted this or not. It's not to criticize the building, even though it seems to be falling apart.
Hey, just there.
Just all
That's
the
lead. I blame lead.
Fair enough. But I would like us to see, at least to have a discussion as it reflects to debt of, are we going to create limits to what we can adopt with COs? And make sure that we're forcibly involving the citizenry to be active and make them make a decision. Do you need a new police station, or do you want to lower your tax rates? As opposed to us continuing to make that decision for them.
I would just stress, if I look at what goes on in the state, I think the answer would be we're going to lower the tax rate to the point where there is no operations of government anymore. Because if you gave Patrick and Abbott their way, that's exactly what we would do, and that is the wrong thing to do, for not only for the future of Pearland, but the future of this state. When you look at our infrastructure in this country and where we are compared to where we were after World War II, it's ridiculous. And I blame my generation, and we have to turn that around.
Look, I'll go on public record. Their proposal is idiotic, and it's short-sighted, certainly. That doesn't mean that we can't. We need to continue to control what we can control with respect to debt. I mean, their plan is forcing us to do what we're going to talk about in subsequent papers, is find additional revenue sources. Ultimately, the money's going to have to come from somewhere. Now, be it special districts that we set up because it's not a city revenue, but it's a MUD revenue. We go like Missouri City, where all their utilities are MUDs, which is also silly. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to, we'll adjust. It's just about how difficult that is. Right now, we need to look at, if this happens, what does it mean for us, and make sure that we don't, at least for this budget year, we don't do something, make a decision that we can't recover from after the next legislative session.
Member Moore was trying to get in, I think. Do you have something?
I'll wait till the next one that's more related to the bond.
All right. So
let me jump in real quick.
Sure, sorry.
All right.
I'll say if Tony wasn't going to jump.
Yeah, a couple things
I was disappointed.
Debt rate going forward. I mean, rates have creeped up over the past few weeks drastically. So at some point sooner rather than later, next time our bond counsel or the financial advisors are in town, I'd like to get an update on that, how that's going to affect things.
Thank you.
Future debt issuance. And then also on page 46, under the title debt discussion, just wanted to note that the way it's written, we're going to increase our tax rate again up to the rollback rate. And that's
The current rollback rate.
up to the calculated rollback rate that we'll calculate again during the next fiscal cycle. So that's a baseline of increasing taxes by 8%. And if that's what everybody decides to do, so be it. But that's not where I'm at.
Tax revenue, as you know.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all I had on this.
The next one is more specific in terms of future bond. We've started talking about this a couple years ago and outlined a smaller program than what we've looked at before, something that could be implemented a little bit in a shorter time frame. And so we've kind of used this $70 million number. We've had a list of projects that have been talked about, higher priority ones, but that line could be drawn or moved. We are getting to the point, and depending on how you look at it, we wanted to look at, Council said previously, a new issue, when that could be wrapped and absorbed into the existing tax base and not increase the debt service rate. And so, it's a little different in that the debt service rate's actually gone down because of the growth in the tax base. So if you compare to what our projections are, we're at that point. But if you compare it to where we're at right now, we would be talking about an increase from where we're at currently. So that's a complication in terms of presenting that, and so that's described here. But we show what $70 million issuance would do on page 49 there in terms of the debt service rate. And Trent, I think, had a lot to do with this one with Robert. Talk about a program and a project list and how we develop that, get PERs, et cetera, and go through that. So maybe we can start down at that end of the table. If there's anybody, Mr. Carbone, you want to start this one off?
Thanks. Page 53 lists out the proposed projects. At some point, when are we going to get input and kind of figure out the final priority to move forward?
You know, if you had thoughts now, we wanted to say, hey, you're not interested in this one, or you see this one's a higher priority than we've got listed. If it's below the line, that's kind of the key indicator. I guess start out with the 70 million feel right, and then if so, then the projects that we talk about in there. Trent, do you have a different thought, or is that?
No, I agree. If we're going to move this forward for 2019, May of 2019 bond referendum, then we need to be making those decisions probably over the next 2 to 3 months, so that we can start the preliminary engineering to develop our cost estimates.
Okay. I guess before, I don't know, I'd like to see, I wouldn't say a workshop, but if we could maybe dive into a little bit more detail on these projects, and then maybe debate them out and figure out what makes sense. I don't know that just by looking at them as presented that we want to sit here and all the staff wants to sit here and listen to us argue over them.
Sure, I think we can provide that additional detail, but if there's any that just stick out right now, we can know what the additional details are, or pull that off the list at this point if there's anything specific.
Huge consensus, yeah.
I mean, the top one has me scratching my head saying we're going to issue long-term debt for park equipment. So I guess I wonder what the useful life of that equipment is versus the length of the bonds.
And those kinds of questions, I mean, we don't have to decide that, but that helps us when we come back for that session, say, hey, here's what the thinking was. It's got a 25-year life, whatever it is, and rationale for that. So. The library is another new library in the that's been planned. We have land for that. That's a big number in that. And then another discussion down the road would be which ones would be separate questions. I think the city's been successful in packaging roads is one, and facilities is another kind of thing. So I wouldn't anticipate we'd try to put one question that had all these things in it to get people to parse those out a little bit.
Well, I think Member Carbone's
well,
idea.
let's stick to going in line.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
Councilman Moore.
Yeah, there's a couple things on here that I'd like to have broke down for better understanding of too. But my main thing is I don't. If we go out for bond on this stuff, I don't want a lot of operational type cost stuff in that bond. If we need new desk or something like that, I don't want that in the bond. To me, that's something that we should budget for and be able to pay for. We should not have to take a bond out to do that kind of stuff. So I want it to strictly, be these large projects that we see need to be done throughout the city. I just don't want a bunch of garbage added into the bond like that.
And that's been our approach. I mean, when we do new buildings, we make a furniture and fixtures, which I guess you build in at the front end, but after that, that'd be part of the operations.
Yeah, I don't want to see that in any of the bonds.
I think the only thing kind of close to that is what Councilmember Carbone already mentioned with the park equipment replacement program, and we need to look at the life of that and whether or not there would be another capital replacement program similar to some of the other enterprise or internal service funds like we talked about earlier to replace those type of things.
But we do bond
Mayor Pro Tem?
I think there's a, and it's I guess it's kind of already been said, but the main thing is making sure that we know a little bit more about each one of these projects, specifically, what the need is. If these are in order as of importance, I mean, I think the SCR library needs to be moved up. I'm not sure how many notches, but it definitely needs to be moved up. It's been talked about for years, even before I was on council. there's some additional projects down here that I see that, possibly need to be moved up way before park equipment. I don't know what street reconstruction program we're talking about, if we're talking about just filling potholes like Houston, or we're talking about specific streets, but specifics are going to be important for us to know, hey, this one should be number one. I'm not sure how important the animal services shelter is, but, again, I go back to the library being right before that. I think the library needs to be at the top. And that's just my opinion right now, but I don't know what else, what the importance is of these other things. If I was to talk about something that's missing, Business Center Drive, I don't know what, I know it's in our 2020 plan for some changes on Business Center Drive, and I know there's some tax entities that we're waiting to come about on that corner of Business Center Drive and Discovery. But by the time we actually get to this bond in 2019, supposedly 288 is supposed to be completed, and the thoroughfare that lets off of 288, the HOV lane, or not HOV lane, I'm sorry, the toll lane onto Discovery on one side, and then the other side onto I forget the name of the street, but
Hughes Ranch.
Hughes Ranch. I mean, there's still no light there. There's still no traffic light there. I'd like to see a traffic signal or something concrete. I don't want us to fund it if there's going to be an entity or that group of TERS that can.
It's all included in the toll project.
So that traffic signal is.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
At Discovery Bay and Business Center Drive, it's included in there. And the same with Hughes and Smith Ranch.
Smith Ranch. Okay.
It's included in, there's 3 projects right there: Smith Ranch, Hughes Ranch, and the toll facility. And I think it's in the toll facility project. So, and then we provided the county with any pro rata share funding that we've collected from the businesses that was in those intersections that was supposed to go to that infrastructure. So those are included. And just to kind of talk about the list real quick, this is a kind of an unvetted list. It's a list that's kind of been compiled over the years. And, there's been some priority put on that, but I know it hasn't been through a detailed, lengthy discussion with the council. So we've got to do all those things, and we've got to provide the details and the information and the education behind these projects moving forward. So, that is the plan over the next 2 to 3 months if we're ready to move forward with the plan to do the 2019 election, so that we can get into the details, we can get into the needs, and then work through a priority that goes through that kind of vetting process, as opposed to just kind of gathering a list over the last few years of needs as they've arisen.
Thank you. And
Yes,
the only thing I would add is I don't know if there's a project plan for Business Center Drive. I discussed it with our temporary traffic engineer months ago, or actually about a year ago. There on Business Center Drive, like between HEB and Academy, there was some turnabouts proposed, or that he had discussed with me, and I don't know if that was something that staff had discussed with him, but
we've done a traffic study and analysis of that piece of that corridor. We have some recommendations on potentially what could change in there. We had some discussions with the developers that contributed to some of the infrastructure in there and the existing turn lanes, and that's kind of where it sits at this point. I believe, and Robert may be able to help me out here, we've got it in our plan for some of our intersection and other type improvements that we've got annually funds allocated for in the existing CIP, but it wasn't the highest priority within that. I don't know if you've got anything else on that.
And you don't have to go into detail about it. I just wanted to know, is that something that
we'll note that and make sure that we've got that included somewhere.
And actually, one more thing is the feeder road off of 288 on the Target side. I know we had been in discussion with Mud 2, Silver Lakes Mud, and about getting that thing taken care of. And I'm not sure where those discussions went, but if we could set aside some.
We've got funds set aside for the design, and we've got a new plan working with the county, and the county wanting to share in half of the construction costs there. And so we're working through kind of the final details to get TxDOT to tell us it's okay to pull the trigger on all that right now. We've got all that in the existing CIP.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Ward,
The animal shelter, if you haven't been there, I'm sorry, it's one of the higher facility needs we have. If you look at the building and the quality and just age of it, it definitely needs some help. I'll be honest, I've questioned the library from day one. I questioned what we just did at the Tom Reed Library by adding stack space and book space and not adding community meeting space. That's the need I see moving forward. And we actually, you know, with the growing staff and everything we've needed, we took the community center away from the community and made it office space because we had nowhere else to put people. So if I look at anything, I think meeting space is what we need more than books sitting on shelves. When I look at reports from libraries, Tom Reed and Shadow Creek are the two top in the county, and they go back and forth. So to me, it's proven a smaller footprint can still provide for the needs of the community, and I would kind of like to see a community center or meeting space of some type added to this. EDC's done their study on large meeting space, and we can look at that. That's separate and apart from what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about that group of the HOA that needs to meet somewhere, or things of that size. So if we're going to add something, that's what I would like. I've fought since I've got on council. Street reconstruction to me is number one. When you look at our pavement inventory study, that should drive, in my opinion, where those funds go, and get rid of as many asphalt streets as we can, and let's go to concrete curb and gutter throughout the city. It's going to last longer. It's going to drain better. It's just all around going to be a better system for us. And I don't think I hope in my lifetime I'll see all the asphalt streets gone, but that in and of itself is going to be a major undertaking that will take more than one bond cycle to do. I am glad we're looking at a bond overall. I'm kind of sad I probably won't be sitting up here when it's really discussed, but when I look at the Pearland community and I look at what the school districts have done with their bonds, both Pearland and Alvin, it's really when I shake my head and people say that they don't want government to spend money. Well, the school district bonds would tell you otherwise. So I think people do want investment in their community. They do want to see us maintain and build and provide these services, and this bond's a great way to go. The total number at the bottom, again, if we look historically what's happened in the past couple of years, Pearland ISD's bond was bigger than that, and the voters overwhelmingly supported that number, and and that's not even new construction really. That was just going in and fixing old buildings, adding space to old facilities, and bringing them up to date. So I do think the community will support this moving forward, and I think it's something we need to do, and thank staff for putting it together.
Just a couple of quick comments. I agree with Councilman Wardno. I think the street reconstruction should be the #1 priority. I do believe we need a library in Shadow Creek, but $18 million, over close to 26% of the items on the top seems a little exorbitant. I don't know if there's ever been a study of how many people are actually using libraries these days, but that number just jumps out at you. I know we need a new animal shelter. $5.5 million seems kind of high to me. I mean, I love animals. I have 2 of them, but are we building the Taj Mahal for them? Just that number jumps out also. Pearland Parkway circle. I'm not sure exactly what that is unless that's the turnaround.
Rebuilding the traffic circle.
I used Pearland Parkway on a regular basis, and it seems like the turnaround works fine. I don't know why we need to put $5 million into that. These are just my observations, so that's all I have.
So, as I said last year, I would like to, and it seems like there's other council members that have the same impulse as I do, or they've adopted it, is that moving the Shadow Creek Library up on the schedule, get the design done early. I'd like to add that to this budget year, get the design done, have the project primed to move as soon as the bond is issued. Again, barring Councilmember Ordno's point, we do not have a whole lot of community space. Our densest population has near no community space. The West Side Event Center is just not big enough. It doesn't fulfill that need. You know, if we had a public-private partnership that could fulfill that need, something I've talked to several developers about, that we don't have the ability to do that as quickly as we can do the library. So I'd like to see that get moved up. I think that that's a need that's has been overlooked. With respect to the detail of the project, look, to the members who don't know as much about these projects, we're given a thick book that says exactly what these projects are and the necessity, gives all the detail we want. So if we can have a programming session like Councilmember Carbone had suggested, we come in, have read those details, I think we can have a more productive conversation about what we want to and what we want to include and exclude from the 19 bond. The traffic circle, unfortunately, it's necessary. It's a dangerous circle. It wasn't designed correctly. It needs to be redesigned. We have a lot of accidents on it. So I still think that's a priority, but I'm not 100% sure that we need the super street. I know the idea there is to keep the initial promise of that being a roadway with minimal delay from Beltway 8 to 518, but I think the $3 million investment to replace those medians and limit the amount of left turns that can be made on that street to save what's probably going to be $400,000 to $500,000 worth of signals at critical intersections, and delay that might be a C or a D. I just don't see that as a priority. If our traffic model tells me different, I'll acquiesce to it, but I drive that street every day. I live right on it, and I think if we do the Super Street program, once we start cutting off medians and preventing left turn movements, we're all going to get lit up from people who are upset about the inconvenience of it. And I just don't think it's worth the value for that 20-year-old promise. That's my personal opinion. The shelter needs to be done. There's another white paper when we talk about roadway maintenance. There's another white paper where we're going to start exploring the ideas of additional revenue sources for roadway maintenance. I think bonding roadway maintenance is probably not the best idea, but we have underfunded, as that white paper states, $3.9 million less each year for roadway maintenance. That doesn't account for utilities and storm. I think that certainly is a priority, but that's not a bonding priority. I think that's something we need to talk about during that white paper. But I do, again, if we could, subsequent to the next budget discussion, or subsequent to when staff, y'all need to start making decisions about how we're moving forward to 19, maybe a Saturday meeting, or maybe a workshop at the end of a council meeting where we talk about what projects we need to include. I think Councilmember Carbone was right. We need to do that.
Just a few things, and I think this process that we're going through right now is a lot better than we have done previously as far as projects and the bond issues and type things that on there. And the way this facility got built here, for several years, we would have our meeting on Saturday, and we'd sit there and we'd come out with priorities that we thought to do. And at the end of the meeting, or toward the end of it, we had each one of the priorities up there that each one of the council members said, you know, that should take place. We were all given, the 5 council members were all given $1,000 apiece of play money to go up and put it in whichever one they thought was priority number 1. It didn't take long to find out how you do that, and I sat back and let the other 4 go up and put their money in each one of the deals, and I went up and put my $1,000 in the police facility, and that's how this facility came out number 1. So I think the process that we're going through is a lot better on there, and going in and looking at it, and the way you get it set up, and the schedule that you have going into it to put into it. And I think, you know, doing the PERs the way we didn't do that in 2000, and it cost us money. 2007 we did. We went in and appropriated $2 or $3 million for just PER on the projects. One of the things that I'd like to see is a little bit more in the drainage side. Problems that we went through with Harvey and all of that, I would like to see us look at that a little bit stronger. And I know there's other funds coming in, other things to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, I think we noted it that this list of projects is pretty light on drainage, and we were waiting to bring those priorities forward as we get a little bit further into our master drainage plan.
Yeah.
And so when we actually sit down and do a session on the projects in more details, we will have more drainage projects to be considered. It's just, this is straight out of the existing CIP, and so we didn't have those projects at the time. So definitely do have more drainage projects to look at.
One of the things that I think that helped us sell in the 2007 is what we did. We come in on the bond program, and we identified the projects, but we list them, Parks Department, and drainage and streets and whatever, and let the citizens vote on each one of those. If you don't like them, and they don't get the in there and voted in the bond, and the rest of it did. And so, as it turned out, all of those were approved as we went through that. But recently, Montgomery County tried to do it all together on a bond program and put everything in and vote all at one time. And they got defeated for one project up there. And so Doyle, county judge, called me and he asked me, said, what would you do different on the next one? I said, Judge, let them go in and vote on individual projects. I said, if they don't want the one going through up there, the road going through, let them vote it down, but you'll get the rest of your projects done. And they did, and they come back, and it was approved. And it's, not brain surgery to do it. But if they had went in and took one roadway going into the woodlands and took that out, they would have approved it on the first and wouldn't have the cost of going back together again. So I think, when you start talking about things of transparency and bond issues incurs a lot of costs, which the rate may go up or what have you as a part of that. So the best part of being transparency is coming back and saying, you, the citizens, voted for these things to go through. And these are the priorities that was out there. And, as the way that you voted on each one of these areas actually sets a good priority for the city. But other than that, I think, the information that y'all got here, and I think, this list will probably change on here, but I think the way you got it set out, the schedule that you got is the way to go.
Mayor Pro Tem, we're only halfway through. Do you want to break? Do you want to keep going, or what's your?
Does everybody else want to keep rolling, or want to take 5 minutes? Keep going.
Okay.
Let's go for like another 30 minutes or so, and then.
So the next one is a big project that's on the near-term horizon, and that's Fire Station number 8 off of Shadow Creek Parkway, right in front of the Reflection Bay wastewater treatment plant. The city already owns the land. So the paper lays that out. It's been on the CIP, so it won't be any surprise to anybody. There was a longer plan that had 2 stations. This facility is envisioned to cover both of those areas that an original plan had covered. Larger one that's got a little bit more equipment and staffing into it, but it would save us quite a bit for the capital construction. And this is in an area that's already had growth. It's not a question of future growth that we need to provide some additional service level. And so the numbers are there, and it's not, I just want to make sure council's well aware, the construction cost is described, but the operational cost under the budget, for the people and the equipment, that the city is going to be committed to year over year is laid out there. So I want to make sure there's eyes on that and full awareness of that.
For the benefit of the ethical ordinance, the architect that was selected for this is a client of mine, so I'm going to excuse myself from the discussion for this fire station, in compliance with the ethical ordinance. So I just need David to come back. So,
Just don't say anything.
all right, I'm closing my ears.
Hey, Clay, let's get all the way through safe communities.
Okay.
And then,
So you want me to go to the next topic
Okay,
then?
we'll go to the next
yeah, let's
topic.
go to the next
Sorry.
topic.
That's
yeah.
fine.
So then,
I do have some comments on that one.
I'm sorry.
I have some questions on
8.
Well, can we let's come back to it after
All right.
he leaves.
So the paper area after that is first response responsibility in unincorporated areas that do not have a strategic partnership agreement or there's some sort of payment agreement. The city's traditionally provided fire services into our unincorporated areas that are in the ETJ. That started long ago when there was a much different volunteer-based and much less expensive, sophisticated fire service. Moreover, those areas have grown and developed from what that was. So the reality is that we'd strongly encourage that the city, that we look at that over this year and how that's done, and there's a lot of ways to slice that. But the city is subsidizing that service. When you roll out the numbers, call it $1 million, call it 750, it's substantial. And the other piece of that is it's also drawing our city fire resources away from the city areas. So, in order to change that, on page 67 and 68, there's a lot of different choices that are laid out there. And so if there's questions from council about, why this is or what makes that up, and then, any of these that you'd like us to start to vet out more, that'd be the thing. This would be a multiple month, many conversation process and discussion. But we wanted to start to, and Chief Riley's laid out this way of looking at that in terms of how we could even that up better so that the city itself is not subsidizing that financially, and we can make sure our resources are available for where they're needed.
We can start.
So
Mayor
you're-
Pro Tem, where we start?
Start at this end with Woody, Councilmember Owens. Any
Member Owens, they
comment?
calling you anything on this pass?
Councilman Perez.
Yeah, I think the ESD3 expansion, I think it's a Band-Aid approach. I think if we do it, it certainly deals with, it allows us for additional revenue source, and we can, it's already it's already created. We can more simply expand it than we can create a new one. But I think with respect to complicating future annexations that may be elective, it screws us up too much based on what my understanding of it. So I don't know if I'm just not supportive of that as an option. I do support an ESD, but I think maybe do we try and set up ESDs for each individual area, or do we create a subsequent Pearland ETJ ESD that's non-contiguous that covers all of those areas, so we can make up the difference? But expanding 3, I don't think is. I think it causes more problems than it solves. Reducing the response area, I think particularly annexation area I, which made it very clear to us that they didn't want our services. I think we need to reduce that. City of Houston can easily cover that area if they wish. But I don't think that we I mean, they sued to prevent us from serving them, so I don't think we should serve them. But we need the, I think we need the ESD to cover the other areas.
So that was option 7 in that, and then I should have mentioned the questions. I did say, there's a little bit different matrix for Harris County versus Brazoria County. So as you said, you could look at reducing the response area for I in Harris County and leave that to those agencies.
I don't want to exclude the park, though. We got Tom Bass Park. That's going to be, it's a park. There's a lot of people playing. There's a lot of opportunity there for there to be a need for emergency service. So I don't want to exclude all of Harris County, but I do want to exclude the area that told us outright they don't want us to serve them.
The only comment I have is I think we need to find a way to where our citizens aren't subsidizing the ETJ for our protection. Yeah, to the tune of $1.7 million. I'll ask Councilman Warren.
Yeah, well, starting on that note, I say just pull I out of ETJ altogether, and I'm not sure why Tom Bass Park's in the ETJ. I don't know what benefit as a city, unless we just want to be able to say we have this Harris County Park in our city limits. I'm not sure where the value is there. Our residents can still go use that park. And if I'm missing something, please, let me know. But area I agree, or L, whatever.
I was the Harris Industrial.
Yeah. Let's just take them out of the ETJ. Let Harris County serve them in whatever manner they can. As far as the options, I like 7. Create the ESD composed of the Pearland ETJs that we keep, and if that doesn't work, then they get 6A. And because we do have agreements with those MUDs out there, and I don't have problems helping people that are willing to help us help them. I do have problems helping people that have said we don't want your services, and like Councilmember Perez said, took action to fight against that. So that's my thought on it moving forward. But until the state decides that we need to go back to a fairer way of acquiring ETJs where everyone that has a financial interest, including the taxpayers of the city that have been providing services for decades, get to vote, I have no interest in serving the ETJs at this point that don't already have agreements with us.
Just to follow, how quickly, what's the process for de-annexing I? Because maybe that's a cleaner, instead of just saying we don't serve that area, we just cut them out completely.
De-ETJing them?
De-ETJ.
We haven't annexed.
Yeah, we haven't annexed them, so it would be de-ETJ.
Well, it's de-annexing them from our ETJ.
Yeah.
So by operation of law, I think that if we were to move the city limit line that is going around the boundary of the ETJ, it would still be, or at least half of that area would be a portion of our ETJ as it butts up against the city of Houston in that area. So the only reason why we have all of that area is because of the city strip line. And once you remove that city strip by law, because of the size of the city, you would have 5 miles outside of your city limit that is your ETJ. But if you abut next to somebody else, the two of you abut. And at the end of the day, half of the park or half of Area I would still be in the city's ETJ, I think, if we were to attempt to disannex it from this, if we move the city limit sign from that area.
We reduce the area, City of Houston can come in, but because of the law, because of the size of our city, they're automatically in our ETJ.
Yes, sir. So half of them would be in our ETJ and half of them would be in the northern ETJ, and I believe that's the City of Houston.
So we'd have to get the City of Houston to take them into their ETJ before we could be completely rid of them.
You don't have to be in an ETJ, so.
I mean, what's
B-
the
by
what's
law,
the downside?
well,
of
automatically
leaving
you're
them?
going to be there. So
Why, if we just stop providing services, just because we're pissed off when we get rid of them, if we keep them, and sorry, I'm pissed twice this morning. If we get rid of them now, there's no way of ever getting them back. But if we just stop providing services, give them the proper notification, why not keep them so that if the state changes the laws, and if we want to annex them in the future, we can.
Well, I think that's certainly a discussion we need to have if that ever comes up on the agenda. I just, with respect to, is it a simple process? I think that was.
Yeah, well, let's figure out if we want to go down that path before we have staff spend too much time on the process.
But from a budgetary standpoint, we want to consider excluding them from our service area.
Yeah, but that's not annexing, de-annexing them. That's excluding the services. But
Exactly.
The property owners now are not always going to be the property owners, and they may come back to us with a 2/3 vote and say, hey, we want to be part of the city. So I don't think it's wise to give it up.
So just
I doubt it, yeah.
So just moving on, with respect to
They don't like that idea.
these muds, I'm not sure what mud is it that's Lakes of Savannah. 21 and 22. Oh, they're here. So let me jump to the options. I think option 7 would probably be ideal, or something where we stop service in certain areas that don't provide us with, or either don't want to service in them, or we really just there's no need for us to continue to service them. I don't know that in here it says anything specifically about that fire station. I see Chief is up there, and so Clay, I don't know if you have any comments on this, but since we're talking about it and we're talking about budget and these muds.
But 21-22 is not on the table for this discussion because we do have an agreement and we're fulfilling that. Yeah. So that's different. That's not, these would be the ones we don't have a development agreement, SPA, et cetera.
So the agreement's obviously not working, right? So what is it that we're going to do to make that agreement work? I mean, I don't see too many citizens here, and this is my third one of these, and they're actually here again. I didn't know they were here, but so I mean, what are we going to do to make this work?
So we've made a relative to that. It's not one of these, but we've said that we are meeting the agreements in terms of the responses, and that if there was desire by the MUDs to add resources that would be based out of there, not exclusive, that there'd be a commensurate increase in the money that the city's receiving for that. And so we've given them that number, and the ball's in their court for that.
In whose court?
In the MUDs. It has been for months.
Okay, so it's up to, at this point, it's up to the MUDs to decide how they're going to staff it with.
No, it's up to them to decide if they want to pay more to get additional resources that would be pushed towards that direction.
If you want to add a budgetary item to look at the fire station, expanding the fire station over there, and what the cost would be.
It wouldn't be necessarily expanding the fire station, but to staff it. I guess some.
Yeah.
Built as a
Yeah.
volunteer fire station.
It's a garage.
Yeah.
We have to expand it to get staff in there.
But again, we've said that there's a way to put a unit there that would make the modifications, but that comes at an additional cost, and that the city doesn't have. We've got the resources and the equipment distributed the way it is, and in order to make that work, there'd have to be more money that comes out of the MUD per that agreement. They have to modify and pay that, and then that could happen.
Well, right now we're showing the most revenue from them.
Yeah,
right?
but that's part of the agreement that we have with them. I mean, the other ones with 2 and 3, I don't even know if that's mandatory, but those are decades old. So that Lake Savannah development was agreed to with the developer for the MUD and a certain level of service, and that's provided for, and that's what's being met now.
Okay, so is there a way to go back to the table and maybe work out? I'm not saying, look, let's set aside so much per year to put a full-service fire station today, but is there a way to work out where some of this 289 turns into, maybe part-time, or even with volunteer, are they paid, or is it
Yeah, I
strictly
mean, there's no
volunteer?
there's no, I mean, the volunteers are paid, but that's, as we've shared, not been fruitful to try to recruit. I mean, it's not there's not people that can commit that kind of time and energy and expertise to do that as a volunteer. So we do have part-time and some volunteer hours that are fill up maybe a quarter of the staffing hours, if that. But so, the money that's getting paid helps offset the city's costs for our $12 million fire department.
Yeah, but here's my thing. I don't know how many homes in Pearland in our city limits have burned down, like in the last 20 years. And so, but we can count how many homes have burned down from beginning to end fully in that community alone, right? So it seems like we would be, more apt to say, hey, let's try to put in something, or try to do something about it. Especially since they're providing us with the most revenue when I'm looking at these numbers from ETJ revenue.
But that goes back to this whole argument about the rest of it. If we,
Yeah, it's not the most revenue. We get it, MUD 6 and MUD 2, we get all the sales tax. They generate the most.
No, MUD 6 is 252. MUD 21 is 289.
Page 65, middle of the page.
But I would say that from a budgetary
Oh, from
standpoint-
sales tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but from a budgetary standpoint, what we need to look at, because I think we share the concern, what would be the cost of expanding the fire station? What would be the budgetary impact to us year to year? It would increase our deficit from 1.7 million to an additional increase, whatever that would be for the staff, and then the cost of expanding it. And again, how do we negotiate that with the MUD? Again, we've talked about it. I know that I am with you in that I want to serve that area, and we had a drowning out there not too long ago, and even though our response time didn't affect the outcome, it was still 13 minutes to get out there, so theoretically it could have. I'm with you in wanting to do that, but we have to, from a budgetary standpoint, we have to make a decision to this body. Do we want to increase our deficit to do that, or do we continue to wait for the MUD to come back and say they'll allocate more money so that we don't increase the deficit?
Well, along with that, and we definitely have to do that. I guess I'm just looking at the numbers here. Obviously from a sales and use tax from MUD 6, I don't know what the sales and use tax is from MUD 21 or MUD 22.
Zero.
Zero.
They don't have
So,
commercial development.
but MUD 6 or MUD 6 is where?
it's the Silver Lake.
So I mean, there's fire stations, probably 2 or 3 that are within 2 mile radius of MUD 6, as opposed to. I mean,
The closest one's
Shadow
4.
Creek 4 is
5 is the closest. So Kirby.
If I could, we're not going to solve it. I mean, the MUD 21, 22, the city has an agreement. We've made an offer. If the council wants us to, at budget, come back and say, hey, we're going to put more city money and then put more resources there, that would not be probably our first choice and recommendation. I mean, we'd rather have, for the city, protection, addition resources at Station 5, where it's already running. So that would not be our first recommendation off the top of my head about where we'd put additional city resources. But that's a discussion that if you want us at budget or otherwise to bring back, we could do that. So,
I mean, right now we're just all we have is an agreement, and you said that we're waiting on the MUDs, and so other than that, I mean, what are we waiting on from the MUDs? Like, are we waiting for them to
if
say?
they said if they wanted to modify and pay, what's the number from what to what on the tap or the connection fees?
I don't recall the number. I know the cost per year is about $600,000.
And that's we're not inflating that. That's not overhead or anything else like that. So, but if they want to go from X to Y on their connection fees, then we have said in the past that we would be willing to add resources, staff up, and put them there that they'd be based from, not exclusive.
Now, on that same note, since the new law says that the voters would decide whether or not they're annexed.
That's not applicable to this area because we've got this strategic partnership agreement.
Oh, okay, okay, all right.
So
I just wanted to make sure that we wouldn't get stiffed later on
No,
after
no.
putting.
We got an agreement, and that's why this whole discussion that is actually in the paper was about areas that we don't have that. So MUD 6, we've got the sales tax, which the number's there. MUDs 2 and 3, we don't have an agreement. And then there's all these other large areas that we've have served.
So for those that are in the room that have particular interest in this, what we're looking at is we've got almost a $2 million deficit serving our ETJ as it is right now. We have an inability to make up that deficit by annexations of areas that that are served by that. The only way, there's at least 2 of us that have openly said we want to increase the service area but we can't increase the deficit. The only way to make up that area is for y'all to increase the contribution. I know there's arguments from y'all, but if y'all want to report that back to y'all's MUD and to y'all's citizens, that's the basis of the discussion. There's desire, but there's no money. We need y'all to help contribute, and then we can move forward with it. Potentially. It's not an item for this.
You know, we really, I don't know if we need to open it up to dialogue, but that you did. So, you know,
Just
we can.
real quick, in the event we did move forward with any, not de-annexation, but removing our ETJ, I did a little quick legal research, and there is a statute that allows that as long as the governing body, either by resolution or ordinance, agrees to.
Yes, sir. So in Chapter 43, there's a process. What I would think that we would end up doing is probably a ETJ apportion agreement with the City of Houston instead of disannexing anything that would actually change the boundaries. So there's absolutely a process where you can make it certain, or in the absence of the 2 people reaching it, you end up having overlapping ETJ, or you end up meeting in the middle.
Right. Okay.
Councilmember Moore.
Not that I don't want to talk about this subject, but I don't think this is the right format to be talking about all of that. I would like to talk about that later at a future meeting with the board, MUD board. My question's related to fire station number 7. It shows in the.
Can we wrap up?
Yeah. Okay. I don't have anything on ETJ, so I'm going to pass it to you because I'm in favor of either 6A or 7, and we'll move on.
Councilmember Carbone.
Yeah, specifically item number 4, sending 1 tanker and 1 pumper. I don't think that makes sense to our crews. I wouldn't want to see that. I'd be in favor of setting up a new ESD with specific limits in terms of they couldn't issue debt. Essentially, it'd just be a way for those folks in the ETJ to pay their share of our service. So I'd be in favor of that. And I guess the question I've been asked is, so we bill for ambulance calls. Can we not set up some sort of billing for the fire side to help with that?
Yes, it's probably more a legal opinion, but there are departments who do charge for responding to fires and rescues.
Okay. And I think we've presented an option like that to City Council, and they declined to do that because they weren't providing the same charges in the city. Are they? If you're going to do that, you have to do it uniformly. And doing that outside the city limit and not inside the city limit was something that council may not have been in favor of. I don't recall the specifics of it, but that was the gist that my recollection is. And I don't know if somebody has more details on that, but.
So there's no way to charge a citizen that's paying taxes less than the ETJ that's not for the same service?
Well, you would be essentially adopting an ordinance, and the ordinance has to be, well, typically an ordinance would only apply within the city limits, so it wouldn't apply outside the city limits. There was a way that I think we looked at doing an ordinance that would apply outside the city limits in terms of You know, if the dispatch comes to us, if the call comes to us, but when the person calls 911, they don't know who they're calling. That's all done behind the scenes. So it's not like the citizen is saying, Pearland, come serve me. And that may have been where the disconnect came in. 911 operators go to the closest jurisdiction, and then after that dispatch happens, you know, we're not going to say, well, we're not responding, and then leaving it up in the air at that point as to whether services are going out there or not.
Thank you.
I think part of that's in the whole discussion.
Clay, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
On this, to be honest. I mean, I don't know which one I would go with right now. I think it needs a little bit more discussion. But I would hate for something to happen that we lose a life in ETJ because Pearland didn't go out and provide a service. I mean, you know, if we had something catastrophic happen in Pearland, I would hate for Harris County to say, no, that's y'all's area, we're not going to touch you anymore. Our friends would say, no, that we're not going to help you anymore. And, you know, I think, you know, we come down to a point, how much is a life worth? I mean, if it's in the area where you got an agreement or not, you know, on this, and I think, you know, there's ways to recoup some of these funds or whatever. But I don't want to see us turn down anybody, you know, if there's something that comes up that really, we have the equipment, we have the people to do something, you know, to help that individual or save that life or whatever. I would hate to say us, no, we don't have an agreement with y'all, and you're not paying us money.
You know what, remember, Wenzel, I think it's important, though, we're talking about who is assigned the first response. And you could be an ESD, it can be another agency. We'll do mutual aids and all that, but somebody needs to have the first response and, in our minds, you know, get paid for it or offset some of that cost. I mean, people live in Pearland, have that as a insurance policy, if you will, that when they need it, it's there, but they live in the city, and, you know, if you're driving on the streets, you know, in the city, that's where we respond to. So it's not about, you know, not taking a call. It's like who is going to be set up to be the first responders for that. And, you know, there's options for that. It can be a new ESD, it could be another ESD, it could be Manville or somebody else, but for all these areas that we don't have an agreement, something I think's got to change. It just doesn't make much sense to draw the city's resources financially and equipment and people to have that free insurance policy for these large areas. And so that's what it's about.
And I would just question using, personally, I can't use the word help, because help implies that it's a two-way. There is no, until there is a way for that to be a two-way relationship, it's not helping those areas. It's just providing.
Well, I'd say area. There's other areas that are contributing.
Some are, but not.
But I particularly has told us outright they don't want us. What Clay is saying and what is unclear. If there is something on fire, there are mutual aid agreements where the City of Houston says, we're overwhelmed, y'all come out. We'll go.
No problem.
But what the problem right now is somebody falls and breaks their legs and calls an ambulance. It's our guys that goes out there. Guy's not going to die. But it's a cost for us to go out there and service them with our ambulance to get them to the hospital. We're not turning them down. We're servicing them in the ETJ. Those are the types of things that are costing a significant amount of.
Right. We're not talking about the areas in green. It's only the areas that are orange and yellow that we're talking about, that we don't have an agreement for, that don't have some help reciprocal sort of thing. So we're not getting any help from the ones in pink. And this map's old. I guess it isn't. So everything in pink, that's what we're talking about.
So just moving on, it sounds like everyone's kind of giving their opinion and staff has direction, but can we go back to the first white paper? I know Councilman Perez said he had to remove himself, and then after this, let's take a 5-minute break.
Sure.
And before we start on infrastructure, it's already 11,
Yes,
and
sir.
so I know the rest of the staff has stuff to do.
Yep. So Station 8, I started to talk about that, so really in your court, how you want to talk about that.
Councilman Carbone?
So I guess with the Superstation 8, we've already got, or there's a consensus that we don't really want to serve Area I. Does it still make sense for that location to be there as a superstation? One, and you know, the cost of these fire stations, I mean, there's capital up front, but it's the manpower, and I guess does the superstation model really make sense? Would we get better response times if we had, if we did look at 2 stations versus 1 superstation?
Where Station 8 is planned to be constructed, that location is good for everything west of 288 and pretty much half of Shadow Creek Ranch all the way up to the Beltway. Where Station 9 was going to go was over here along McCard, east of, or right around Country Place. The problem is there's not really any readily available land there, and you don't gain that much benefit because you have such a whatever it's called, major thoroughfare running through there, which helps with response time. So I regret creating the term superstation. It's just really a way to combine 2 stations on land the city already owns. And when we did the models, you didn't really improve response time that much by splitting them apart like that.
Okay. And I guess the other question I had is, in the future section of this white paper, is how old is Station 4? Are we already, I mean, it says we're looking at designing the design phase to replace Station 4 in the coming years?
Yes, Station 4 is, I believe, 14 years old. It was originally an all-volunteer station, and so one of the bays was converted with some dorms and a kitchen and a living area. There were some modifications. I wasn't here at the time, and it's just not adequate for a full-time staff.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilman Moore. So my question was on number 7. We talk about number 7 in the future art there on page 62. Sorry, and it says that it'd be similar to Station 1. So my question is building it to the specs of Station 1. That's one of our smaller stations that we are going to have in the city. Is that going to be adequate with some of the growth that we anticipate? I just don't want to build something super small and then have to come back a few years later and increase it.
Yes, so Station 1 is one of our smaller stations. It could be modified to house 3 units with 3 crews. I just don't see that happening anytime for quite some time. Station 7 area is primarily and heavily residential, and again, the demand is really initially 1 fire engine pumper, and then as demand goes up based on response times, we might add an ambulance. But it's not just limited to 2 units. There's the ability to put another unit there in the future if it's needed.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ordno?
No, I like the plan of combining those. The more I'm learning about it over on the west side into a big station. But, you know, this and PD, fire and PD are our biggest cost, and they're our biggest responsibility as a government body. For me, government should do what individuals can't do for themselves, and fire and PD are the perfect examples of that. So it's where we spend the majority of our money. The growing pains going from a volunteer unit to a full-time have been difficult, to say the least. We're getting there. To me, the bottom line in that is we have the best service and best response times of anyone in this area of Missouri County. I can't think of anybody in northern Missouri County that can get the response times that we have, and that's because we have a full-time staff. And the cost associated with that is great. And it's one of the few departments I hope I pay to do nothing but sleep and sit in the station. We hope they never have to go out, but we still have to make that investment to have them there so that when they're needed, they can respond. And growing up in an area in the county that was serviced by, I guess growing up, absolutely no one. I don't know who would have responded because I remember when the ESD came in and Volunteer 143 off County Road 143 became part of that ESD. I mean, we knew that we were out there and it was going to take a long time. And I guess the only thing that bothers me in the discussion today is we talk about houses burning to the, totally. I think unless we're willing to spend a whole lot more money than we are now, and I don't think we'll ever get there, our response times for fires are really going to be more along the lines of making sure the neighbors' houses don't catch on fire than truly saving the house that did catch on fire. The response time to save that house has to be so low when I look at all the studies and all the information. I just don't think we'll get there. So it's saving the neighborhood, it's saving the surrounding areas, and I just think we need to be mindful of that and have reasonable expectations. But thank you all for all y'all do, and we'll keep supporting it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Little? Maybe not saving the house, but saving some lives in the house. So.
I think on the information we got here on the fire stations in the future, I think plenty of studies have been done to say what fire stations need to go where within the neighborhood. And I think that's a pattern y'all following on here. So I just say keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I had one other question for the Chief before you go. Not to get back on this subject, but what is the fire station at Lakes of Savannah? What is the amenities there?
Nothing.
There's a small kitchen, a small office, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and space for 2 units.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, I think one of the issues we have with the fire station location and the number of stations that we have is the traffic issue. And I was coming along there by the Chamber of Commerce building, and the fire truck is trying to get out of the road that runs by the by the chamber office, and it was blocked. The roadway was blocked, and he was trying to get across to hit at our. It was just. So we have to kind of look at the placement of the stations with access that doesn't dump out on a traffic jam, and we're finding it more often that the trucks. As a matter of fact, they wound up having to get over in the oncoming traffic lane, and everybody moved over so they could get by on our side. But I think it's something that we need to take to remember in our placement of our stations, and also how we need to address this in the future, because we're going to have more houses, we're going to have more traffic, we've still got the same roadways. So it's something that we need, I don't know if there's a good quick fix on that, but it's something to think about.
All right. I think, Mayor, before you got back there, we're going to take a little break here before we did the rest of them. So.
Good. Sound like a good plan. Thank you.
5 minutes. 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
11:09.
Recess at 11:03. Peterson?
So I think, Mr. Mayor, we're sustainable infrastructure topic. We had a few on this. First one, we kind of dealt with, frankly, at the last council meeting, at least as it pertains to the buyouts and property acquisitions related to flood mitigation. But then we also talked about some other topics post-Harvey. On the CIP, we're going to have drainage projects. We want to review our roadway design criteria and impact on the existing roads. So if there's any questions or comments on that, Mr. Upton and friends are here for that. Mr. Wilson?
Yes. Let's crank it up here. Woody, you got something to say? Okay. Let's wait till the rest of these guys get. I think they're on the way.
We want to wait for Tony? Okay.
The biggest component for me on the update of the design criteria manual, Robert, I think we've spoken about this before, is I think it's a priority for us to start requiring all development and our own CIP roadways to have in-pipe conveyance of the 100-year. It can be with a stressed HGL, but HGL below the gutter line, or limited 6 inches below the gutter line, whatever is responsible to allow the roads to continue to be passable. But if we don't implement that criteria soon, we're going to kick the can further down the road for our ability to do a regional detention. So I know that will have a cost to our CIP projects, but I think it is a cost worth having, an overrun worth having, because if we can get that water in those pipes, then we can convey it to an area where we can put in regional detention, and the reinvestment would be the detention ponds we know, the on-site detention ponds we know how to build. We no longer have to build, and then we get more value out of a piece of land that's up against 518 as opposed to not having a piece of land that's up against a creek that has no value. We could do a regional pond over there. So that would be my suggestion for a change to the design criteria manual.
Reverend Young?
No comment.
Or no?
No, I want to thank staff for putting it together. There was a lot of good information, so thank you all.
Okay. Councilman Reed? Councilman Moore? Councilman Ordino? Councilman Carbone?
I guess it's always a cost benefit, and you look at the new part of the city, specifically Shadow Creek, and how well that performed. Did the streets get flooded? Yes. Did we have any major structures flood? No. So, how much more do we want? Because if somebody could just predict the rainfall for the future, that'd be great. But, we performed very well for everything that's developed under recent criteria, correct? So, how much, should we develop everything for a 1,000-year event? Yeah, that'd be great if budget wasn't constrained, but it is. So, I don't know. I don't want to go and say, hey, it needs to be this huge, this huge change as a knee-jerk reaction to the hurricane, whereas kind of the newer stuff that under the current criteria performed well. That's my major comment.
We are just talking about the white paper on page 72, correct? Are we?
Yeah. And
okay.
There was some design criteria that was mentioned in the fourth bullet there. So.
Yeah. So let me rephrase. What I agreed with was Orange Street Service Center, fire stations. This building's already kind of designed. The buildings that we need to go out and support the community in these events, those are the ones that I want to see built up, to this higher for sure. The rest of them, I agree with Councilmember Carbone. We can discuss, but when we talk about public works, public safety, those are the ones that I feel we need built up to this. Possibly the rec center was used as a shelter. That's another, facility that if we look at something like that. So,
Councilmember Carbone, I don't know if you were stating a counterpoint to what I had said or not, but just for clarification. So what would be proposed with investing in larger storm sewer in new development, and particularly new roadways or rehabbing existing roadways, is to have a program that does fix older areas. It doesn't change the criteria we have for new development, which we know is protected. An example is Shadow Creek. We have a regional program. We have conveyance of the 100-year, and the area performed well. Same thing as Lakes of Highland Glen and some of the other master plan communities. So we can't implement that for existing areas without having the conveyance component. again, maybe I'm being a little conservative on what you were commenting on, but that's why I think it's important that we go down that road. Pun intended.
You know, there's one building I think we need to kind of look at in the future, and that is the neighborhood center is occupying what used to be our old city hall, and that was the home of the municipal court and the police station and the police department. And after a while, the police department grew, and the court went looking for a place to hang out. So we moved over to Veterans Drive and built a police building and court facility. And the police department grew, and we had to kick them out, the court out, and they moved to City Hall. So when we built this building, we built it as a court facility and police station, and it's nice to have them close together. But I think that the police station, as we grow, is going to be expanding, and it's possible that we need to look at another location, piece of property, and there's one real close to us here that's vacant. That would be an ideal location for a court facility and area. So it's something we need to take a hard look at, because I think City Council moving over here has kind of crowded them up a little bit, and they're going to be expanding with personnel. So might want to put that on our thinking list. And that is a facility that is used quite frequently by our citizens.
Anything else on this paper, sir? Yep.
Okay.
So next one on page 75, relative to Harvey. We talk about our operating mode, and we rely upon, like agencies across the country, instant command system. We need to do some more in terms of training and preparation under that. A key piece of that is the emergency operations plan, and Mr. Martin, our emergency management coordinator, is leading us to update that. On 76, we got 7 broad sort of lesson learns and after action categories that we're going to be working upon. And then on 77, some specific budgetary items that we're going to be entertaining in the upcoming cycles. And then the last is our emergency operations plan has these annexes, which is our preparation manual. And there's a wide variety of responsibilities that we have. And we're going to be taking a hard look at all those and updating those and modernizing and practicing on all of that. So we were very serious about our emergency management responsibilities. Now we're very focused on all this and have that experience seared in our heads. So.
Okay.
Comments?
You have another question?
Just
let's start off with. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. My only comment would be on page 77. We got those 9 items of I guess, potential budget items. I hope they're ranked in order, because that mobile command unit, I don't know. I haven't seen a justification for that as of yet.
I don't think they're in rank order, but here you go. We're going for a grant for that. I think it would be a helpful thing to have. I don't know that it's waited this long, obviously, but it would be. There are situations, obviously, when you need it, and it would be helpful. But so if we can get a grant to offset at least some of that cost, we'd definitely come back to you on that.
Keith?
Just brief comment more than anything. To me, the biggest struggle we have with emergency management along the Gulf Coast is, thankfully, we don't have events every year, and we tend to get laxed when we go 3 or 4 years without an event, and we don't put the emphasis on. It's going to be at the front of everybody's mind for the next year or two. I just want to emphasize that we need to keep it at the front of everyone's mind, even when we've gone 3 or 4 years out, and training, cooperative training with all the parties, tabletops, getting people together and building the relationships, I think, is what we saw as one of our strong points as we went through Harvey, and I just want to continue doing that and make sure that we expand those relationships, because that's that's really what's going to save us in the end, is knowing where to go to get what we need and being able to work together. But hats off to everyone that worked the last event, and just let's not forget what we have to be ready to do.
Hey, Brother Little.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things. I think what we've learned from Harvey is there is a community effort in these type of events. What I struggle with is I want us to be as prepared as possible, but there's also the reality of this doesn't happen very often, and how much do we want to how much equipment do we need for something that may never happen again? Theoretically and statistically should not ever happen again in our lifetime. With respect to food and personal hygiene equipment, I can tell you from volunteering at the neighborhood center, there was more than enough from the community to be able to fill those needs. But how much do we need to fund or associate funding to having that immediately? I'm not saying I had to derive an answer, but I think that what Harvey taught us is that the resources are there. We may have to borrow from the community a little bit, but having an MRAP, that even if we did grant money, we got to keep the thing maintained. And a lot of having done maintenance on a lot of military equipment, the problem is when you need it, it doesn't work because it's sat around for so long. And I'm struggling to say that in response to Harvey, this is where we need to spend money. I'd rather spend that money on infrastructure improvements to reduce the impact of Harvey than to deal with personnel movement. The rain gauges, I think, are extraordinarily important. I know we're talking about expanding Harris County Flood Control's rain gauges, which is essentially exclusively on Clear Creek. It's too much of a budget item for us to look at for this year, but perhaps we can look at, if we're not already, having a system that either can expand with support of Harris County Flood Control to cover all of our other major channels and let it tie into their system. So they're maintaining, we'll pay for the maintenance, but it's their software, and then we just link to it, as opposed to us creating our own duplicate system. But I think, as discussed in a later white paper, we're talking about the drainage plan, master drainage plan. Once we get the new HECRAS and HMS programs, if we have the rain gauges, we can more easily go in there and update those models periodically. We don't have to start everything from scratch. We can look at data. So I think, particularly with respect to this, I think that's more important because it allows us to better implement and plan for preventing having to need boats, as opposed to for us holding boats and having to maintain them.
William?
Well, I think, the information here is great information for us to have. I mean, Harvey is kind of out of the norm, but if you talk to people living in Alvin, they said that they've been getting through this before too. But the thing about it is, it's also as part of just a regular hurricane. It's not if we're going to have one; it's when we're going to have one. Additionally, we know it living here in the Gulf Coast area that we're going to, one season doesn't satisfy everything. But so I think we're on the right path to put some of this stuff together, and I think as far as some of the equipment coming out of the military, I think that's a good thing for us to do. I mean, it's not that difficult to keep up with maintenance on to where they are running. And I know a lot of the other cities around here have got some high water vehicles that come out of the military, and south part of Texas has received a tremendous amount. So I think the things that you're looking at here on the impacts, I think it's a very positive thing for us to look at, since we live here in this part of the country.
When you talk about sustainable infrastructure, I did have a chance to drive down toward Houston, and I didn't get very far because you couldn't get through the roads. They were underwater. And I think we need to make certain that all of our thoroughfares and major thoroughfares will be above water, even in a Harvey type environment. And a good example of that is Cullen was out west over toward Magnolia South Fork. There was that section in there that Cullen was underwater. Pearland Parkway was underwater pretty well, and part of a different space. So we need to anticipate elevations and taking a hard look at that, as well as making sure when we put our fire stations and the city facilities that they will be like our city hall. It was high and dry, and the police station, it was high and dry. So we need to make sure that we don't fall into Houston's trap of building something and then find out they should have built it higher or more future water resistant. So I think, guess we're next ready for the next topic.
All right, sir. Next one, somewhat storm related, but somewhere just general economy, talking about impact on our city revenues. I really don't see that city property tax base values will be impacted negatively to any extent. And the fact is, the city's got a $10 billion tax base, and the areas we had, if you're affected, it's very, very impactful. But in the scheme of the total tax base, not large areas, thankfully. We also talk about sales tax revenue, and got a little bump from that, we think, but that's probably going to return to the normal, and that's been positive of late in the last couple months. And then permit revenue, that has run, as we've shared, quite low from budget. I think the number last quarterly was like $500,000 off of budget, just from the level of activity we had in the past, and not necessarily storm related, just growth volume related. So just wanted to share some things that we're tracking and continue to keep an eye on with the economy of the area as a backdrop. So.
Good. Will you want to start off on that?
No, I'll wait to start on the other end.
You didn't want to talk first, man.
You want to make sure what Carbone has to say. Okay, Tony?
I guess in this regard, my biggest question I've already mentioned is how the changing economic environment is going to affect the interest rates and our future borrowing costs. That's it, Mayor.
Yeah, so in the packet with they talk about the 4% on the sales tax revenue and the need to maybe look at only doing it at 3%. Is that because we just are not growing as fast as we were with businesses that are generating sales tax to us? Or what's the decline there? Is it market driven, or where did that thought process come from?
So the good news is when we did our last budget amendment, we moved that number, I think, from 4 to 3, and then it went up. So as long as we keep moving down our budget, the number is going to go up. But I think it's just because we got a bigger base, and it's harder to grow substantially on that. I mean, unless you're adding, most of our sales tax revenue comes from the big box traditional retailers. So if you're not adding in those, it's not going to make a big dent in that number. So just maturing, land absorption, et cetera, et cetera. And it was interesting to me, frankly, the last sales tax report we shared, we're kind of in the middle of our peers, surrounding communities. So it runs the gamut. In the Bay towns where they have a lot of industrial sorts of uses, they're having great times at double-digit growth. So, and then, Sugar Land, which is kind of more built out, they had a negative over the last 12 months, which is surprising. So that's sort of the lay of the land, I guess.
So we're kind of like flatlining here.
I don't say flatline because we're still growing. If you're a flatline, you're dead. But
I don't think so.
more modest growth. So
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything bad about it.
Nothing going?
I'm good, Mayor.
Okay.
I'm good.
Just for edification, permanent revenues, that goes into, is that a dedicatory,
No.
does that have a dedicatory use? Does that just go into the general fund?
It's in the general fund, so and it doesn't cover all the costs. So we're not obligated to, do any accounting specifically for that.
Okay, I mean, I guess anticipatory permit revenue is going to go down because at some point we bail out and there's not as many permits going in. So,
Right.
But each budget year we're just going to
Yep.
downward trend on that revenue source.
Yeah, unless we see, obviously, that's what we do each year, and that's sort of the point of that paper part section, right?
Okay.
Good.
I'm okay.
That's okay. One of the things that I think has changed our sales tax issue is the inviting appearance of Pearland. I think it's the things that economic development has done with the enhancement of our roadways, entrances, and corridors. I think that invites people to come in. And if you don't get people to come in that don't live here, they spend everything they spend as sales tax. And internally, we I think for some reason Harvey kind of dampened our spending with our community citizens, but I think we need to have some kind of a internal campaign as to why Pearland is getting to be a city where people want to come and spend their taxes. And I'm not quite sure what that would look like, but I think it's something we could spend some time on. Probably working with the chamber on that a little closer. Ready for the next one?
Yep. So the next one's interesting and kind of evolving since we actually pan this out. And this is talking about transit or alternative options. Some of the paper goes back and just recounts the history of the city working with and talking to Metro, and then they've made some changes. But we're at a point, frankly, where we are very interested in approaching you about a pilot program with a different agency that wants to do a park and ride. Mr. Branson's gotten the first proposals from them. We've gone back and forth a little bit before we can present that to you. But they want to provide that and use one of our existing parking lots, which I think makes a lot of sense. So there is potential for something to roll out in the very near term, but this has been a topic that gets talked about, and just want to share what we know at this point and let you know something more is coming. So.
Okay. Tony, why don't you start off again?
All right, thank you, Mayor. What's changed? Last time we looked at this, we were going to have to subsidize it by about $400K. Now all of a sudden somebody jumps up and says, hey, we'll do it for free, just give us a parking lot.
I think it's because one's a metro operation. They're required. They're going to make us pay for. They're not going to subsidize it, I guess. And so there's this other operator that's got experience, and they're willing and able, and probably having us have that existing facility, help somewhat too. The land and the parking lot that's underutilized, not used during the day. So,
But, I mean, even after we constructed it last time, I believe we were going to have to subsidize ongoing operations.
I don't know if John, you go there.
It also has to do with the rate base. For example, let's say, for example, Metro, they have a standard cost that they charge their participants. This particular provider would have the flexibility to charge the rate that they would need to cover their cost. They feel like they initially came to us, and again, we've had conversations with several different transportation providers. This is a private company who has buses, has the material in hand. I mean, the capital already invested, and so they are looking for places to branch out to and provide additional services using the equipment they already have. And they actually initially came to us when we started talking about this pilot program. We're interested in providing some sort of annual money on an annual basis. And we said, no, not at this particular time. So from a fare standpoint, the fare might be a little bit higher. They are looking at some potential in-kind services, which are mentioned in here, such as traffic control if needed, and maybe some security during the day, those type things. So what we wanted to do is really just here, is this something you're interested in? Do you want us to pursue it and bring it back to you? If so, we'll do that. If not, tell us that and we'll move on.
I guess my thought is move forward cautiously. I think it's great the citizens have been asking for it, but I don't know. In some other pilot programs we've had in the city, once you roll a program out like this, you can't undo it, and so yeah, cautiously.
Yeah, I mean, I would be all for this pilot program, but like Councilmember Carbone said, cautiously as the pilot program ends and then all of a sudden we get hit with a big fee to continue, trying to do something like this would not be in our best interest because, like you said, citizens, once you give it to them, then it's hard to take it back. So I'm all for the pilot program. I would like to try it, but again, I'd like to also know kind of what we're looking at down the line if there's going to be some big balloon fee at the end of this pilot program.
So, when we met with Metro, I think they had proposed the pilot program as well, but the thought was that if it ended, it would end on their terms, and so it would be easier. If they pulled away, they pulled away. I don't remember the cost though associated with them doing the pilot program. We wouldn't have gone full fledged, right? From what I understood, from that meeting, we wouldn't have had to set aside or commit to any tax dollars. We wouldn't have had to commit to any fee, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if we got that far.
Yeah, well, actually, they do have a fee that is associated with it. It's a cost recovery. It would cost us money, and it's based on a formula that they've created based on their capital equipment, their operating cost, fuel, et cetera. So it would ultimately be a fee. That's where you may recall previously they weren't in favor of providing any service outside of their service area. Now they've changed that, but they have to recoup their costs based on this formula.
Yeah, I remember when we did meet with them, they did talk about that calculation, and that calculation was kind of like an unknown because we haven't even started yet. So we don't know the fuel and et cetera and all that, and I was not a big fan of that.
I guess to answer your overall question, I'm obviously in favor of us moving forward with it. So there's 3 votes, but cautiously, not because we're rolling out something and may have to pull it back, but more or less, what's the reputation of this service provider? Have they done other communities? How successful were they with other communities? With Metro, it's a bigger entity, and so we actually have somebody to, I hate to say this, but point the finger at if something went wrong. And I'm not saying that we don't have that ability to do that with this service provider, but obviously Metro is more controlled. It's more fluid. They've been doing this for quite some time, as opposed to maybe somebody that's been at it for 5 to 10 years. So, but I'm definitely in favor of us moving forward and being cost effective about it.
Good.
I'm in favor of moving forward. I think for Pearland, the public-private partnership is what makes the most sense for this. It's a service that our residents need, yet at the same time, I struggle because it takes revenue out of the city, and we're putting it in Houston for them to go to work, go buy things, go shop outside of the city. So I like the public-private partnership. I'm going to go a little further than cautious and say I just want to make sure that when we do this, it's obvious that we're providing, here's what the city of Pearland's providing. The buses and actual transportation's being provided by this private company, and I hope it works. I also, at the same time, hope we can find some way to continue to work with Metro. As much as some people won't like to hear it, I think the only way for us to do it is find some way to get into Metro's taxing jurisdiction. So we're actually paying, part of that funding to them, because ideally, to me, the solution is you take Metro's light rail and you bring it down Kirby into Shadow Creek. I mean, that is the number one biggest impact we can have to traffic going down 288 into the medical center, is give people another option. And I've said it multiple times, I don't know if I would ever ride it. I was born and raised in Texas. We like cars, we like trucks. But I know our population moving here is coming from areas that have mass transit, they're used to mass transit, and I do see a use for it. But that's going to take Metro coming in and working with us, and I can understand from Metro's standpoint, in one sense, they want some certainty that there is going to be a revenue stream coming from them, and right now that certainty isn't there. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. The other thing I will tell everybody that works in Houston in the medical center, get your employers to get with Metro and say, we need these services so that we can continue to operate in Houston. Our employees are coming from outside of your service area, but they are still contributing to that tax base and to that. So I think that's another strong ally we can have if we can get that voice behind us to help. But I like the public-private, and I am in full favor of in-kind services, actual dollars. I think we need to be cautious with.
Okay, Brother Little.
I'll pass.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll say outright, I just don't trust Metro. They just, knowing or being involved in this almost from its inception when they were in the initial track that's on I think 59 and 288 when we were looking at that area, they've changed their mind, changed the parameters, and it's not for nefarious purpose. I'm certain of it, but they have not been what I would call a dependable partner. So I am not interested in exploring anything with Metro, but I am interested in exploring something that is a public-private partnership that does have some contractual measures in there where we can elect to get out of it completely, and borrowing against facilities we already have in place, or if there's an improvement needed for additional parking, it's for an area where we get dual use. So in here it mentions the Shadow Creek sports facility. We could expand that parking lot, and then we could have more tournaments. So if we expand the parking lot, it's no loss for us. We'll not be in Metro Service District because they're taxed, if I understand correctly, they get their revenue through sales tax, and we're capped. We'd have to reduce our sales tax and give it to them. So we're never going to be in their sales area. I am absolutely a full fan of us getting the Metro rail down to here, but we've got to go through the city of Houston to do it, and I don't think that's going to be a priority for them for any time soon. So absolutely explore the idea, so long as we have provisions in there where we can terminate at our own election. If they're not comfortable with that, then 521's getting expanded, the toll rate's going through. We'll have some traffic calming in the area that hopefully will resolve some of the traffic concerns in the area.
Ready?
Yeah. We had looked at this once before, the ones that were here on there, and when Metro actually bought the land out here and we're looking at doing it, they were going to increase the price of the ride from Pearland down to the medical center by $1, in which we were going to get the $1, from doing that. I can tell you that Metro has a letter from the federal government that says if they're going to be profitable, they're going to have to go outside their service center, as it is right now, in order to do, to be profitable in there and do it. Arlington tried to go back in DART a few years ago, and DART said, yes, you can do it, but let's go back to the inception of DART, and you pay us money from their point all the way up to today's date that you want to go in. And the dollar amount was just so outrageous. But, there's one thing, and I think Perez touched on it, of bringing the rail down here, and they have made a connection off airport over there for rail. And the price of the land coming down through that area was a lot cheaper than what it is. What we have, like I said, a biggest number of people that work at the medical center than any other area, in this part of the country. And the medical center is planning on building another parking garage. Well, the land down there now is $420-something a square foot. Everybody that drives down there has to pay a minimum of $10 a day, the people that are working there, just to park. So it makes better sense to them to go outside and come down there, and it'd be cheaper every day to pay $10, or whatever the price is, to ride from Pearland down on the bus or whatever and come back. But that's what's happening at the medical center down there now, and the people that are going down there. paying for the parking. And they'll never recoup the amount of dollars that they paid to build the parking area and what the value of the land, and they want to use that more for the medical side of it. But, yeah, we did look at it one time before, and I guess Goodman is the one that's good. And I got 0 down with Metro down there now, so. But, I think it's something to look at. I mean, the people, I don't think would lose that much as far as people shopping or whatever. But actually taking care of the 9,000 to 10,000 people a day that drive to the medical center every day. And you take 9,000 to 10,000 cars off the road every day. Probably the total authority wouldn't really appreciate that, since there's going to be a direct connection to the medical center. So I'm open up to look at it. I know that there's a lineman already been put in place to go down to, from airport down to the Beltway, but not crossing over, the Beltway in that area. So I appreciate the work that has been done on this previously and working with people. I think transit, I probably won't ever get a mile car, probably won't ever ride one, but yet and still there's people that really could depend on this on a daily basis.
If we were Pasadena or Bel Air, we could use city buses. But we're a standalone city, like Sugar Land is, Katy, and we're sort of in a position where the Metro realizes that they need to reach out to the suburban cities, because they actually get money from the feds to support transportation, but we can't pay the 1 cent percent to be a member of their organization, because we've used up all of our tax pay. We can only have 8 cents. But it's something we may want to look at, because you notice that although we're not using city buses, that Sugar Land and Katy and Missouri City have all established a relationship with a park and ride with Metro. And it's something we may want to take a hard look at, because what that does, people that don't necessarily want to drive into Houston but and live out here and have to drive, but they wouldn't mind taking a bus in. So it may contribute to our community to have additional transportation options, mobility options, other than 288, Toll Road, or Beltway 8, which are driving. So, but we don't have any buses going in. So it might be something we maybe want to take a look at, although it's cost a little bit. Maybe that's the cost benefit would be very low with the benefits we get. I guess we're ready for the next step.
All right, Mayor. So next we have 2 very separate papers. One's on a street maintenance fee, and the other one's on a drainage utility fee. And I want to make sure that we're aware that they're deal with them each individually. And I put this under the category of background information. We always talk at budget time, well, wouldn't it be nice if, and wish we could do that. These are revenue sources, fees that have been used. The first one, not nearly as much, apparently, and that's a street maintenance fee. And only size city that we were aware of is Corpus Christi. They went down this road and implemented it for the street maintenance fee. And there's a lot of background work that has to be done for that particular one to make it possible. But this is something that theoretically, at least, could be imposed, and then would be used to provide additional revenue source for street improvements in this case. So just want to take temperature if there's any interest whatsoever in looking at this one.
Okay. Woody, you want to start that up?
We did this several times over the past. Didn't get council to go with it, but on that, and we had key people that were very outspoken now, and they went to the neighborhood, a lot of the HOAs that given that we got a new council, I think maybe that's something. I don't know what kind of money you're talking about for a fee to go on there. But some others, when we were looking
Don't make no sense.
Yeah. What's the point?
Pointless doing it.
So that's a history of it. Next.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that there's a necessity for a street maintenance fee. This program that can be adopted without voter referendum, I don't think is sufficient. I want to thank staff for putting it together, but I really was hoping that we could have something on voter referendum for the May election, and I think that we may not necessarily have time to do that. So what I would rather see is, well, let me back up a little bit. So this allows us to say, hey, you got frontage on this street, we're improving this street, we're going to tax you at a rate for 9/10 of the cost. The problem is that a lot of the people, or a lot of damage on the streets, and I'm going to use Cherry Street for example, the damage is not by the people who have fronted it. It's the school buses going down who we can't tax, so they don't contribute, and BDD4 who we don't tax and they don't contribute, and they don't front it. So, and furthermore, a lot of the streets that need repair are against some homes that, I mean, the people there couldn't afford to pay enough for it to really make a big difference. What I would prefer to see is a more robust revenue source for this, similar to what we do in the drainage fee. The drainage utility fee, I think we should adopt immediately because it can go citywide. It's an enterprise fund, and we can utilize that for long-term projects. And we can do a lot of good with that fee. We need the same thing for the streets. The streets are as much of a utility as water, in my opinion. But we need something. If our only tool is to be able to do this by voter referendum, I think that's the path we need to go, in my opinion, because we need everybody contributing to the deficiency we have in funds for our streets. We've said it every year. We did a study, says we need to invest $5 million a year in our streets. This budget year will be no different than any other. We'll get about $1 million, which, as we discussed when we awarded the contract, is about enough to do an asphalt overlay to one street. It's insufficient. And for us as a community, not just council, but everybody who lives in the community, to not be willing to invest money into our streets, at some point, we're just not going to have drivable streets. This will be exacerbated once Shadow Creek, which is about a third of the way through its service life, once those streets start deteriorating. And those are concrete streets, and they're a lot more expensive to repair. To Keith Ordino's point, every asphalt street that we have, we need to have a fund to replace that with curb and gutter concrete, because asphalt's not working for us. But we cannot do it with the funds we have. I would really like staff to help me to understand what we need to do, what the timing would be to get this on voter referendum for a street maintenance fee. Whether it makes sense to make a street and drainage fee and have one referendum for both, it's not my preference. I'd rather implement the drainage fee now and do the street fee later. But if we can get it on the November ballot, I say we do it. If we can't, then we do it on the May ballot. But I think we need to put it to the voters and tell them outright, we can't afford to do these streets. We don't have enough revenue. We've got to get you to support us in generating more revenue so we can fix the streets and fix our traffic problems.
Yeah, I read the white paper on this, and I'm a little confused because the statute says that you can only assess the fee against the property owners that abut the street or the sidewalk. And toward the end of the paper, it says that we could generate approximately $2 million per year based on 30,000 utility accounts. Is that everybody in the city?
That would be everybody. There was no way to actually analyze what we could actually generate, so that's based on if we did something to everybody's street.
Everybody's street had some type of repair, so everybody's assessed a fee. We know that's not going to happen. Everybody's street's not going to have a repair. So that comes out to about $67 per household. Okay. I kind of agree with Councilman Perez. I find this one a little bit unfair, and I'm leaning more toward the drainage utility fee. I would support something if we did a little more work and research in that area. So I'll pass over to Councilman Ordino.
Thank you. we've got to do something for street maintenance. I've been saying that forever. I'll be honest, if this is our only option, I'd support it. But for multiple reasons, I just don't like fees when we have other ways of doing it. And the bottom line is we do have other ways of funding it. And it's going above the rollback rate on the tax rate and moving forward. And if the voters don't like it, let them push back. But, well, and that's fine. And then we can have the discussion of, do you want to do this? But to hide behind a fee, number one, I don't like. I've never liked it. The state does it all the time. We don't tax. No, you just fee us all to death. And you can say it's not a tax, but if it's coming out of my pocket going to government, it is a tax. So that's my problem with it. When I look at it, I don't like not to exceed 8% per year interest. Right now, 8% sounds really high. Let's look back at Carter, and 8% wouldn't have covered the city's cost. So, you know, to me, anytime we look at interest rates and not to exceed, it should be a percentage above prime. And I think the state, if I understand right, has locked our hands on that, but I just have to point that out because it just makes no sense to me. We have a national, you know, prime interest rate that we can go on, and I don't know why we just don't tack on to the top of that. And my other issue with both these, and we'll just talk about streets right now, is looking long term. Let's say we impose this. This one is a little different because if I understand correct, you can only impose it when you do work on the street abutting the property, which is inherently unfair because if you look at a lot of our commercial developments, yes, they get benefit from that, but so does everybody else in the city. When I drive down 518, I don't need, you know, that business paying for the total of that because it's used by the whole community. And it gets even worse when you get to minor collectors like Dixie Farm, those residents along Dixie Farm. I couldn't imagine if we tried to put that on them. And my last statement on it is, let's say we did it and you put fees in and it's really more, well, I'll hold it for the next one because it's a different standard.
Okay. Oh, read.
Try not to confuse them.
Okay.
Mayor, I don't want to repeat what's already been stated. I don't have anything else.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know that I'd really be in favor of this, but if it was brought to a ballot and the voters voted on it, I mean, I would go with their wishes on however the vote came out. But that would be the important thing for me. If they voted for it overwhelmingly, then, I mean, it is what it is.
Yep, same with me. The only way I could support this is if it went to a ballot measure. I mean, it's increasing fees, it's increasing our tax. This is proposed in addition to going to the rollback rate, and you know, to top it all off, it would be on the utility billing, which we can't get our water bills right, and now we're going to try to go allocate 9/10 of some road repair to certain properties. So even the implementation, I think, could be problematic.
Mayor, just a quick other note. So the benefit of the utility fee would be, to Councilman Member Ordino's comment, the benefit of doing this as opposed to the general fund is we could borrow against it the same way we do with the water and sewer enterprise fund. We can bond specifically for roadway improvements, and it'd be a revenue bond because we have revenue for it. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the street fee, and we have the drainage fee. It looks like drainage fee could be implemented by our vote right now, but the street fee can't. And a couple other members want it to be a voter initiative. I also want it to be a voter initiative. Would we want it to be a street and drainage fee, a voter initiative, or would we want the street fee to go with voters and have the drainage be adopted by us? I think it should be both. I think it should be a street and drainage fee adopted by the voters as a referendum. But I think if we're going to explore it, we got to give staff some direction of how we want them to move forward with it.
kind of interesting. Several years ago, back in 1970s time frame, Shady Crest and other streets where they were all dirt roads. Yost Road was that part of Old Alvin. So we came up with the idea of using crushed concrete and charging so much per running foot of the property adjoining a roadway. And we paved Yost Road with crushed concrete, and the streets in Shady Crest, if you live there, that's what used to be there, not now. And Yost Road and several other streets in the city that where people kicked in an amount of money, and if they didn't pay, we'd put on their property value and pick it up when we sell the property. So it's an interesting concept, something we might want to look at, but with a little caution. Guess we're ready for the next one.
You know, Mayor, you can, if you do that, you can go commercial also. You know, the Texas Department of Transportation will be glad to give you 518. They'll give you transfer it 518, bring it up to ASHTO standards, do the maintenance on it for 5 years, and turn it over to the city.
That's it. So we made do back in those days.
So, Mayor, the other one I think is a little cleaner and more in general use around the state, and that is this idea of a drainage utility fee. This is described well. Robert did the research and wrote that up with Eric and Raj, I believe. So, I mean, one of the advantages, people would be able to see, and understand that, their money's not going to this general fund. That there's actually some money's going towards drainage, which people see as more tangible, I think. So that's the idea of providing a funding stream, if you will, for some of these stormwater improvements that we can get after some of the projects. We do have our master plan coming up, and even with a bond issue, I can almost guarantee there'll be unmet needs and especially maintenance needs that won't be able to get covered without some extra monies.
Tony, you got a thought on that?
Yeah, I don't care for it. I mean, it's an additional tax. I get it. It would solve a lot of problems. It gives us a lot of money, but I don't know. I don't know that I can support it, and specifically not just by passing a resolution by council. That's my thoughts, Mayor.
Not a big fan of it either. If it was added to a ballot and people voted for it, I'd be okay with that. But I don't like this adding it on here. If I'm right here, it looks like it'd be determined at $4.90. That's a 2013 average fee assessment for a residential at 34,000 meters. So I don't know what that fee would be today in 2018, but I'm pretty sure it probably wouldn't be $4.90. So that kind of has me scratching my head wondering what that fee would be, because it'd probably be much more substantial than that, and I don't know that I'd be okay with doing that.
Sure.
That fee in here was just an example number to take a look at what kind of revenues could be raised based on our number of households and commercial properties.
Is that the lowest example or a high example?
That's the average.
Average.
Average from 2000.
Yeah, page 100's got the samples, so it's $5. That'd be $60 a year for a residential.
Like with any good fee the city would do, we could probably start it really low, but increase it pretty good every year.
My thought is kind of what's already been stated. I mean, I'm not in agreement with this, and we're going to go up again with water this year. I mean, we're hitting the residents with a lot of fees already, and so that's unless the residents want it, which I'm pretty sure they're going to say no. I think this is something we need to bypass.
Okay. I'll start with again, when I look at voter propositions to increase their cost, historically they pass. So I honestly think right now this one's a no-brainer. If it passes or fails at the ballot. Now, my issue with it's going to be a little different. You know, the one question from the comments that I have heard would be, how are we going to pay for this? And if we just want to say we're not going to pay for it and we're not going to provide the services, let's just say I don't want to drain things or I don't want roads. But if we do want them, let's find ways to pay for them. Again, my preference is do it through the tax rate. Just be honest. Let's look at it every year. Let's actually fund these things that we've refused to fund in the past. And my other fear with fees, and it would go to this fee more than it does the other one, because this would be uniformly applied across the city. I like that idea. Is, again, when I look 40, 50 years down the road, is this fee going to stay to construct drainage? And at what point do we feel like we would be built out with drainage infrastructure? And that's the only time I would have issue, is if that fee did not go down at that point. If we were talking strictly maintenance and it was adjusted every year and looked at by the body, I would feel a little better about it. But again, my preference is let's just be honest and upfront with the taxpayers and use the funding source that we've used forever, which is property tax, and just actually charge people what it costs to operate the darn city. I don't understand what the opposition to that is, besides you make people mad. And I'm sorry, if you're running for this position or you got this position, we're not here to make people happy. We're here to provide them services and give them the services that they ask us for. When they start asking for less services, I'll stop making these comments. But I haven't talked to a resident yet that doesn't want more.
Well, it's 3-1 up to me. I say put it to the voters. Make it a referendum and see what the voters want.
I just want to pay for it.
So, most of the way there with what Councilmember Ordno said. Look, I think it's an outright honest conversation. If you're saying that you do not want to increase this fee, and we're kind of, we're doing the same. Frankly, we're doing the same thing that happens at the state and happens at the federal government. We're continually promising lower fees. That's the only complaint that we ever hear. There's two sides to that argument that we hear perpetually, which is we want lower taxes, but we want more services. That is consistent with nearly everybody that we speak to, and we only are willing to have the fortitude to address one of them. We need more money to fix our roads. If we can't do it through the tax rate, we have to do it through a fee. I agree that this should be put to the voters and let them make the decision. I think it should be a street and drainage fee referendum put as soon on the ballot as we can get it, and tell them, look, if you want to continue to be able, for us to be able to sustain our infrastructure, we need additional revenue, and here's the revenue source, and here's how you're going to deal with it. With respect to it having a terminal point, infrastructure has about a 50-year service life. If it's built perfectly, every 50 years, we got to replace what we put in 50 years ago. Shadow Creek is, the first parts of Shadow Creek, about 20 years old. So in 30 years, those roads are going to have to come out and get fixed. That's on top of all the roads that are in the older side of Pearland that are already 40 or 50 years beyond their service life and still not fixed. Again, like Cherry Street, like we just dealt with Orange, like we just dealt with Linwood. If we don't have the fortitude to at least say, put it to the voters and let them make the decision, we need to have a fee to be able to do this, then I don't know what we're doing up here other than just patting ourselves on the back for doing nothing. I think that we put this to we put a referendum together, we put it to the voters, hopefully on the November ballot if we can't get it on the May ballot, which I don't think we can at this point because of timing. But we have to come up with a solution to these problems. Otherwise, the next Hurricane Harvey, we will not be able to survive because the infrastructure we have in place that worked will no longer work. We have to do something better than what we've been doing.
Yeah. Brother Owens.
Well, I think, you know, in order to do this, you're going to have to go with the public vote on it. The first thing that you're going to say is, okay, well, if we come in here and we pay X number of dollars a year on a drainage fee, you know, how about our tax? Where did that money go that we were, you know, if this didn't pass, where did that money go that was going to do it in the first place? So I think, you know, I don't really have a problem with it, but I think this is one of the things that you're going to have to go to the voters with.
Yeah.
Anytime you put a fee in, you know, like you said earlier, there's not a lot of difference between a tax and a fee on there. But I think, you know, in something like this, you really need to go to the voters, and if they approve it, let it go. I mean, you know, so that's the only thing I have to say about it.
Yeah, these areas that we were talking about for fee, they belong to our citizens, and I kind of wonder what would when you add all those fees together, how many Starbucks would that be? Another thing, about 6 Starbucks would be to take care of most of it. Just quit drinking Starbucks for a little while, drink a normal cup of coffee. So I think it's something that we're gonna. It's got to be fixed. You either fix it by a fee or you fix it by a tax rate. Everybody complains about the tax rate, which complain about the fees. So we've got to make a choice as to whether you fix it or not. And our responsibility by state law is that we have to fix it. So where does the money come from? Like you said, Brother Perez, that we've got to make sure that people realize it's they live here, they have a responsibility. And if they're going to be a citizen of the city, don't complain because they have drainage, because you're not helping with the drainage fees, or don't worry about your street not being upgraded because we don't have enough money normally to do it, so it's your street. Come on. So we'll see how this works out.
Pretty soon, if we add all these different things in there, it's going to look like our telephone bill. 9 different areas that you add into it, the fees that you pay. But some of the people won't want it anyway. You get in some of the areas where they got open ditches, they do not want you to clean them out.
Check our tax rate against some of the cities in Houston, and you'll find that we're doing pretty dang good with our pretty low tax rate.
So Mayor, the last one, I kind of touched on it, and probably just more general information. We talked a little bit about, we looked hard at last year's revenue on sales and permit. We described, you know, what went on behind that. I think in some ways is a little bit of an anomaly, but we're wiser for that and have good information. We're going to take that lesson learned for next year's projections. But that's probably more just for reference. I don't know.
Okay, Tony, got a viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I guess one point to clear on the bottom of page 107, it says sales tax is the largest source of the general fund revenue. And I think when you look at it on a line item, it is, but when you look at the TERS admin fee that comes back, I think that's a little misleading. I mean, sales tax is a huge portion, but it's not the largest. We're still mostly running property tax.
Okay, fair. Gary?
I'll pass on this, Mayor. I'll try to come back.
Okay. Derek?
I'll pass, Mayor.
No comment.
Me too. Me too.
I
passed, Mayor.
He said no comment.
So, Mayor, the section under tab 6, this has been asked for, and it's helpful to give us sort of a sneak peek at what the directors are thinking about future staffing. But that said, this is absent of any vetting on priorities and reality of revenues, et cetera. So this is a very starting point, and just let you know that we've got a lot of personnel needs to be able to provide the services and keep things up all across the board. So unless there were specific questions or comments, it's probably best just to peruse through, or if you had questions or thoughts.
Do we ever hire that address coordinator?
Yeah, and then they left, and now we're trying to hire another one. So we're going to bring 2 in next year.
2? You're not serious, right?
What? No, I'm not. I'm not. Maybe Robert is, but.
That way I can get at least one out of the deal.
You have no idea.
Tony, you want to
Yeah, thank you,
steer
Mayor.
us in the right direction?
In terms of staffing for finance, I mean, with all the funds we've outlaid, and not specific to finance, but in general, on the IT side, I was hoping to see a less need for staff based on the efficiencies that we're getting from deploying all this capital on the IT and ERP side.
I mean, we could have a theoretical discussion. I don't think there's a one-for-one whatsoever. You know, I could say, too, that's having the technology is making the people we have work smarter, so we're not having to add even more than that. But, you know, the reality is just to have systems that work that are integrated and keeping it up. And I don't know, the technology, the one-time investments in the scheme of our operations are, out of line or that significant. So,
Gary, did you have some?
Pass, Mayor.
Derek?
I think we need staffing in a lot of our departments. I think we've been historically understaffed. When we look at technology, when I got on, we were historically under providing for the technology needs of the city, and we've got to build those back up. And I would argue technology-wise, we're still not up to where we need to be. We're starting to catch up, but when you're 10 years, 15 years behind in technology, it's hard to catch up. Staffing's kind of the same way. If I compare to other cities in the area that are similar in size and we compare staffing levels, there's really not a comparison in a lot of our departments. So, it's needed. Once again, it's just how are you going to pay for it, and that's what this discussion today needs to be about, and looking at the realities of needs and funding.
Be a fee.
Yeah, I see a total of approximately 153 additional employees over the next 3 years, and like Councilman Orno said, we've got to figure out a way to pay for these people. And are the police and fire increases based on the projected population growth? Is there any correlation there?
I mean, I think everybody's looked at population, and police and fire had the advantage of the Berkshire study for police, and then the city skate for vice versa. So we've got some good studies there that share about the outcomes, and it bakes in demand, population, and just other existing growth.
I mean, if that's the case, then we're expecting the biggest population growth in 2019, or is this more of a catch-up type number?
Yeah, I think that's what they front loaded. I mean, they'd say we want to do all these to catch up ideally to what we're at now. So yeah.
Kind of a wish list catch-up number.
There's more than just wishes, but I mean it's idealized, right? So
I see. Parks and Recreation has a double asterisk next to it, but I don't see an explanation for that.
I think for the Parks and Recreation, the staffing that you're seeing are relating to all of the new facilities that are coming online. You've got Independence Park, additional programming there. You have the Dolores Finley Nature Center, that's coming online. So several of those staff members have to do with additional programming and individuals with those new facilities, plus the maintenance and upkeep of those facilities.
Thank you, Don. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple of things. One, I mean, if I could wave a wand and get all these departments staffed as they're requested, I would love to be able to do that. But the reality is, for reasons that we elect, we don't have enough revenue to fund these departments as they need to be. I think technology does add efficiencies, but it doesn't mean that you can stick with one person to run a very complex department, or a handful of people to run very complex departments. It just keeps us from needing even more. I think looking at the satisfaction study that was done, the National Citizen Survey, The only area we really scored very negatively on is traffic flow. Most people were very satisfied with how the city worked in general, according to the study. I mean, they're all extremely high numbers. So I think, with respect to mobility right now, our biggest priority to fix some of the mobility issues is to hire staff that can concentrate on it. I know what was asked for was a technician, then the engineer, but I would much rather reverse that. I'd rather get the engineer in first and then hire the technician. That way we're not hiring the subordinate before we hire the supervisor. And I think the engineer will save us more money than the technician would, because we can get the engineer, we can get the software, so he can start running models internally rather than us having to continue to pay consultants to run models. We can get him to run timing models or look at impact studies, or to be honest with you, he can review the impact studies as opposed to having to have a consultant review that stuff. So I think that staff member ends up paying for himself several times over. So I think that should be our a priority. The continuous onboarding for the fire department, we've seen a lot of relief in the response times on the 90th percentile for police because of increasing the staff, utilizing the response time as the metric to what we're trying to get down. But we're still not there with fire, so we need to get going with the continuous onboarding. It's a fairly robust number and continuous for the next several years. But if that's what we need to make sure people are safe, that's what we need. Other than that, I think as more details come in, we'll just have to pick and choose which departments we're gonna satisfy this year and which ones we're gonna satisfy in future years. My biggest concern based on the write-up was finance. Other than the other items I mentioned, finances, their write-up makes it sound like they're having to work significant overtime to keep up with the workload, and the term burnout was used, and I mean, to use that term in this report that knows that we're going to see it, I'm imagining the people who write it have the general decorum, so it wasn't used lightly. So responding to that, I think that maybe we really need to take a good look at that and make sure that we're staffed so that we're not burning a lot of overtime hours and we're not burning a whole lot of staff members. So that's all I have, Mayor.
I don't have much to say on it, on this. I mean,
our staff and
people say that this is what we do. I'm sure that's what it is. The only thing I ask, is tell us how you're going to pay for it. I know it's probably needed, no doubt about it, but just let us know how you're going to pay for it.
Mayor, I think Chairman Carbone had one.
Mayor,
Yeah.
Mayor, now that I had a chance to review my notes, I've got a few more comments if I can hit on.
Okay. I was going to do a wrap-up comment when you get through.
All right. So a lot of the memos from the Parks and Rec show the costs up top, but when you read the description, it sounds like the net cost will be closer to zero, so a lot more manageable. So I'd hope that we can get those pushed through this budget cycle. On page 175 and 176, I guess if I can get a little clarification, it looks like we're requesting a special events coordinator specific to Independence Park and then a special events coordinator in addition to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is a wish list, right?
It is, yes, sir.
If we go to
clarified wish list now.
Yeah. And on page 181 and 182, the chart on 181 shows the calls for service actually kind of staying steady in 16. Specific to crashes, the calls for service and for crashes actually went down in 17 as compared to 16. But then when you go to the chart on page 182, you can see the crash reports are projected to be much higher in 17 versus 16.
How's the projections on the chart on
Okay. All right. And I guess the last thing, in the middle of page 182, we say traffic unit officers have proven to be cost neutral following the first year of deployment. If that's the case, I'm willing to put 40 more on the street. If it's cost neutral and we can get them out there and that would reduce our priority one response times, why wouldn't we until we get to the turning point that we have so many that they're not cost neutral?
That's your comment?
Yeah, I'm done, Mayor.
Yeah. I was going to say there's some cities in Missouri County and others that are not growing. The staffing's not an issue with them. They're stabilized and they're not growing, so staffing's not an issue. But one of the things we have to remember is that we're growing, and we're going to grow much faster. We're supposed to have 4 million people come in the next 6 to 8 years, according to the reports I'm getting, and which means that we're going to get our fair share, and more than our fair share. But we've got, by law, we're supposed to serve those people with the services that we have offered them as a citizen. So I think really when it comes down to selecting staffing levels and quality of people, that's where our senior staff and members of our supervisors have to make a decision. We've done a darn good job in the past of determining, making sure we have the quality people to fill the service that we need for the population base that we're trying to serve. So I think it's something that my hats off to all of you in here, as well as our Clay and his staff. So, but it's something we're going to have to worry about. But I think that decision has to come from a recommendation from Clay. I don't have any other comments.
Hey, Mayor, just to I want to give recognition.
You want to try to do one more?
Tab 7. Just I think good management and practice. We revisited and gave updates on last year's. I mean, those don't drop off completely, and so staff did some nice work here too. And I want to say aside too, I appreciate. I know from the comments, council read through this and noticed a lot of the materials and absorbed a lot here. So even though we might not have talked about every single detail, I mean, your comments reflect that we know you looked at that, and that's very appreciated because there was a lot of work that went into these. But if there's any comments on the prior year updates on tab 7, entertain those too.
That's some good information in there. And
Yep.
You want to share your thoughts?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Page 207, I believe. So this is having to do with what Councilman Perez was sitting on earlier, the Microsoft licensing, and I guess we've outlined option 1 and option 2. And option 1 looks like it's the recommended path. My experience with the option 2, the Office 365, that offers more benefits than just the licensing.
Is that what you're coming?
Oh, he's coming up.
There he is. I didn't see him move.
So option 2 is Office 365. You are correct. It would allow us to offload our email server to the cloud. There's a few other benefits behind that, but if you look at it as a whole, anytime we offload anything into the cloud, it really ties the hands, at least internally for staff, it ties us down. Meaning we don't have direct access into the systems at that point. So we're basically contract negotiators and relying on a third party to support. So the ticket goes into us. We then have to funnel it to Microsoft, and depending on how often or how quickly they can get it fixed, they'll fix it. So while there is some benefit to go that route, keeping it on premise allows all of our systems to integrate with the email system seamlessly.
All right, thank you.
Jerry, you got to wrap up something?
No, Mayor, I don't.
Keith?
I'm good.
No comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, staff member, for speaking with me after or during the break. Daniel, I appreciate you giving me more information about what I asked for. So I do believe we need a license so we can keep up with the software. I think if what you described, if you can kind of share with the rest of the council what that implementation process would be for updating everybody into a current Microsoft software.
Sure. So when we talk about the client software, we'll talk about like Excel, Word, and the Office Productivity Suite is what it's called. That's really seamless to the end user. We can push it out. So that's a very quick fix. The only caveat to that is some of the mobile devices. If they're not connected to the network, we have no way of pushing it out. And we have no idea of how to identify those unless they bring them to us. So that's the Office side. There's a few other components, like the server side is my estimate is about a 6-month rollout. And that's to update all of the servers to the latest operating system. That's kind of done seamlessly also to the end user, so there's minimal downtime for them. But it is a transition. And then we also talk about the application, specifically email. And that one is very straightforward. That's just a migration path, and users have relatively no idea that we transition to it.
So if the funding was allocated, you would be able to update everybody into a current Microsoft operating system and update all of their Office suites to a current version, making it more secure. You could do that with staff inside 6 months.
Correct.
So we wouldn't need any other consultants. We wouldn't need any other soft.
It would all be done internally.
Okay. So with that, I would say I'm very supportive of us doing that and adopting, to be honest with you, whichever licensing implementation that you think is best for us. I agree that there's probably some insecurity with pushing everything to the cloud. Again, just rehashing something I said earlier with respect to to our police officers and the benefit of the study that we did, switching how we measure response time to the 90th percentile, taking their recommendations to get into the districts, and then taking in beats onto the districts, and seeing how that's positively affected our response time significantly with a modest investment in staff. I commend you all, Chief. I commend you greatly for being able to have some success there, and I think, with respect to the citizen study and the people I talk to, everybody here feels safe. And seeing how often we capture criminals when they do something stupid in our town, I feel safe. And I love advertising that to people. This is a very safe place to live. So I commend, Chief, I commend you for your leadership in that. That's all I have to say, Mayor.
Okay, ready to wrap up?
I'm going to give my time to Councilmember Perez, which he's going to take it anyway.
That's good.
No.
We got some constructive input.
I already took it.
Thank you. You want to keep talking? You want
No, I promised staff I'd let them out at noon, so I got to buy them a beverage now. So.
I suspect we'll be visiting some of these later. Yeah. Thank you. Thank everybody for being here. I think it's very special that we're going through this process. I think it's going to be a growing year. Our state of the city said that we're a standalone city, which means that we've got a lot of things that we have to do that normally a suburban city like Pasadena and Houston don't have to worry about. So thank you for being here. Just keep doing the good job you're doing now, and apparently it's going to be all right.